Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 156. My name is NBZ and the season is coming, Bally, of Star Wars. It seems like Star Wars is everywhere. It's all around us. And we're just talking about how we should read a Star Wars book end of this year and trying to figure out how many podcasts we should be doing about Star Wars. It's just
with a potential of a lot. I'm currently following along Kind of Funny, and they're doing one Star Wars film a week in the build-up to episode 9. So I'm currently in the middle of Force Awakens with 3 more films to watch after that, and it's a really good time.
Yeah, it's been a little while since I went back and watched. I think the prequels has been quite a while. Like, I watched when I was at uni, maybe 3-4 years ago. I remember watching them through, and then a couple of years ago, me and my dad watched through the originals again. So I've seen the originals quite a lot recently. Prequels, it's been a while, and Force Awakens I watch a bit more regularly. So yeah, it's one of those things that I probably should go.
And are you still only one viewing of Last Jedi, Rogue One, and
1.5, I think, because me and my sister sat down to try and watch Last Jedi again, and we got halfway through, and we're like,
wow.
So didn't end up finishing it, which I still would like to finish the second half, because I think the second half of Last Jedi is actually a lot stronger than the first half is. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, and there's definitely going to be a lot to talk about. There's a TV show happening, there's the video game coming out, and of course there's the big episode 9 itself. So be prepared for us to talk a bit about that in different podcasts as the end of the year comes on, but we'll get to that when we get to it. We are going to talk about other things this show, which is video games and things like that. So, Bally, do you want to let people know what the show's going to be like?
Sure. So it's a slightly different show this week. For our first segment, we're going to be talking about the games that we have been playing. Second segment will be our emails. And then for our third segment, we're going to go deep on Luigi's Mansion 3 spoilers. So I should also say we're going to talk about Luigi's Mansion 3 in our first segment, but we're not going to spoil the game. And then we've both actually beaten the game. So in that third segment, we're going to spoil everything. And when we say spoilers, we don't really mean the plot, if that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, is there a plot in Luigi's Mansion? Yeah, not really.
We more just mean the environment, some of the bosses, like some of the more pleasant surprises of that game that I think that, in my view, certainly is kind of the best part of that game, and it's nice to not be spoiled on that stuff. So we won't talk about that in the first segment, but we will in the third.
Yeah, so you can stick around for it if you finish the game, or if you don't care about us talking about that stuff, and we'll just leave that at the end, which means it's easy for you to stop the podcast and come back to it later once you have played the game. Yeah, because that's one of those things that annoys me in podcasts, is they'll be like, oh, we're going to do a spoiler section here and skip ahead, and we do that sometimes where we'll put a timestamp in the description, but I think it's just easier if you just say, we'll just do all of it at the end, and just, at your own discretion. Much easier to duck in and duck out. Cool. So let's get into it then. Let's talk about video games we've been playing. And Luigi's Mansion 3 is the video game of the hour. It is, is this like the 5th major release from Nintendo of the year? There's been maybe the 4th or 5th. I think it might be the 5th. If we're talking about from summer onwards, right?
Yeah.
Because we started with Mario Maker to Fire Emblem to Astral Chain,
Luigi's Mansion,
to Link's Awakening, and this.
Yeah, Link's Awakening, and then 6 if you count Pokemon coming next month.
Yeah, I mean, we are forgetting about Yoshi's Crafted World at the start of this year, but I don't think anyone remembers that game even happened.
How could I forget?
So yeah, and definitely a one that has been anticipated for a while, and Nintendo and Next Level decided they were gonna put it out on Halloween. It came out on the 31st of October, which is very appropriate, but it's weird because Nintendo games, they usually come out on Fridays, and it was a Thursday, so this is very much deliberate marketing for Halloween in particular, so it was a little bit strange it came out then.
Well, I didn't actually get it on the 31st because the order I got with Shop 2, I hadn't read the small print, and it came with a key ring of Polterpup and some stickers, and as a result of the key ring, it didn't fit through my letterbox of my new flat. So I had to go and get the game the next day. So I didn't actually enjoy any Luigi's Mansion 3 on Halloween.
That's okay. I mean, it's a game that you don't necessarily need to enjoy on Halloween. To be fair, we're people who very much aren't into Halloween at all.
Yeah, we really
don't like
yeah.
scary things, are averse to horror of any description.
Don't want it.
But you know what? Luigi's Mansion is the kind of horror I can get down with. You know, it's that charm, it's that
family-friendly
that
horror.
cartoony-ish. Yeah, exactly. The family-friendly horror that everyone can love. So we have both finished the game. I did my standard thing for Nintendo releases, which is to binge it in a weekend and put like 15 hours in the course of 3 days. Bally, you just finished it this morning as of recording.
I played about an hour to a couple hours every day, more or less, and then just maybe did 3 hours like this morning and last night, and yeah, like I'm very impressed by this game. Like very, very impressed. I think it's a really considerable step up from the previous two games, and I actually think it takes the best aspects of those previous two games, where you've got a lot more character with. They're not portrait ghosts. I get they're more just bosses, but the portrait ghosts, the bosses, the polish of the second game is definitely here to see. Like everything just feels like you can interact with it when the second you're sucking, that everything's rattling, things are flying like crazy. There's money hidden under everything. Like the detail from that perspective feels incredibly polished and clean.
Totally, yeah, and that's one of the things that really stood out to me in this game is the physics systems of it, right? We've seen in recent years that Nintendo has been like, oh, physics, that's fun. Like they've kind of discovered it in some senses, with Breath of the Wild being the major first step there. And Luigi's Mansion is like, hey, do you like physics? Here are all the fucking physics in the world, man. Like, here's a shelf full of really meticulously crafted items. How about you just fuck that thing up and just mess everything, and like papers are flying, money is shooting out of it, coins are dropping, you got notes in the air, like everything is just so tangible. And I think the AC Rumble works so well in conjunction with that stuff. I love the feel when you are sucking in notes as opposed to coins. Like you can really feel the difference between them. And when you find like a huge stack of notes and you're just like sucking it in, it's real good stuff. Of course, talking about Luigi's Mansion is difficult because you're always talking about blowing and sucking and all these things, and you just get taken out of context.
And flashing.
And flashing, of course. Yeah, Luigi's Mansion really just all about innuendo all over the shop. But you know, those are the core mechanics, right? And I think one of the things about this game that has really instilled to me a lot of the reason why I connect with Nintendo's video games, a lot of what draws me to them, and why they feel so good, is the simple act of performing actions is amazing in this game. Like, just going around and sucking things up and clearing out rooms and collecting money and finding secrets, the pure joy of using the vacuum cleaner is fun enough on its own that I don't really need any other kind of reason to do it, right? In essence, you don't need money in this game. Like, all it does is an ending where you're like, oh, you got a C rank mansion or an A rank mansion or whatever, and the money, you can use it to buy like the golden bones, you can use it to buy gem locators, so it tells you where gems are in the environment. But ultimately a lot of that stuff is meaningless. Like, it doesn't really get you anything outside of the satisfaction of getting a collectible. And I think the thing that Luigi's Mansion 3 drives home is I'm fine just getting the collectible. I'm actually, because the joy of just doing it, the act of figuring out a puzzle to get a gem, or the act of clearing out a room of ghosts to find a golden ghost, just my own curiosity at doing that stuff, I don't need a skill tree or a carrot on the stick at the end of it, because the game itself just feels so good to play inherently, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and as much as there's not like any skill tree or progression in that sense, there are like new things Luigi can do, where there is the plunger you can fire and then suck like from doors and pieces of furniture and enemies.
You can use it to basically toss trucks, not trucks, what I'm thinking of, trash cans. I don't know where the word truck came from. Obviously open doors for wardrobes, things like that.
And you've still got the invisible light from Luigi's Mansion 2. And
the dark light,
Dark light, I should say. And then on top of that, you've got the ability to while you're sucking ghosts, swing them through the air and smack them on the ground, and doing like a hefty 20 damage like each time. And
there's a lot of those new abilities, and you do get majority of them pretty early in the game, right? So one of the things I found actually interesting was because it does that, it has, that we're talking about similarities to Breath of the Wild, it kind of does the same thing where it's like, okay, here's the plunger, here is the ground pound, which like pushes ghosts away from you, here's the dark light, and then obviously Luigi.
Luigi is huge, yeah.
Within the first couple of hours or so, you have all those things. And so for the rest of your adventure, you're basically at a point where you have to figure out, okay, which of these tools do I use to apply to a particular situation? And there are certainly areas where I'm like, I don't know what to do here. Like it can be a little obtuse at times, but it's definitely an obtuseness which isn't overbearing, and it's one that you can definitely figure out if you just give it the time to do so.
Yeah.
And that's partially the reason I turned off the hint system you get from Egad, because Egad will be nattering on the phone at you sometimes and be like, hey, go over here, Luigi, go over here. And I'm like, Egad, shut the fuck up. I know there's a thing on my map. I can go there in a second. I want to explore before I go there. So he kind of does that.
I also found that the answers to many of the puzzles actually were much simpler than you might think, where you would kind of be playing around with the environment when in reality there was just this one thing you had to do. And I don't want to spoil anything, obviously, but
God, I can't tell you the stupidest thing I ever did, which is in that opening underground garage area. Like, I was running around that place for fucking ages, maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And I never realized there's just a door to let you leave. And I'm just, multiple times that happened to me where I'm running around, because the thing with all these items is you're thinking, okay, maybe I use this, maybe I use that. Sometimes the answer is you haven't gone through this door. And multiple times that happened to me where I was just stumbling around like, oh, I didn't go through the door. I'm a moron. Like, that definitely was a sticking point.
Yeah, I found the same with like bosses and knowing where to go next. It was normally right in front of you or explained to you, and then obviously if you've not picked that up, then and I left the hint system on. It didn't bother me too much, and you guys would just tell me, oh yeah, you've got to do this. Like, so it the ease of play, if you want it, is there. And I actually found this game generally considerably easier than Dark Moon, I think.
Yeah, I mean, my overwhelming memory of the end of Dark Moon is that one level where there's like 900 ghosts, and if you die, you have to go back to the start of it.
And they don't hoard the ghosts onto you too much. They're quite good at saying, okay, there's hordes here and there, maybe more so towards the later game, but this game never throws too many ghosts at you, I would argue. It's definitely a comparison to 2.
Yeah, and maybe we should talk about the combat in a bit more detail then, because as you mentioned, you now have the slap, as it were, where you can just take ghosts and slam them into the ground. And I think a lot of people have been like, well, it makes the game too easy. But for me, it's the first time in Luigi's Mansion where I've really felt in control of combat, you know?
Because I think they took the dodge away, actually. I don't think you can do that anymore while sucking and other ghosts are throwing things at you. So
were you able to dodge in the last game? I don't remember that.
In 2, you were able to press the B button on your 3DS, and you would do like a sort of loop jump in the sky to avoid someone throwing like a banana at you or something.
Yeah, I don't recall that at all.
Really?
But in this game, the idea is that you can get into a combat situation where you flash a ghost, start sucking them in, and then in order to combat another ghost who's nearby, you can just slam that ghost into the other one. Once that ghost is dead, the other ghost is ripe for the picking, because it's just been slammed to the ground. It's now susceptible and vulnerable, so you can just start sucking it in straight away, which means...
It's like it's been flashed, right, exactly.
It essentially means that you don't have to worry about constantly charging up your flashlight and using it for every single ghost in a combat scenario. You can chain these things together as long as you're in a good position. The ghosts are all lined up nicely, where you can chain from one to the other. Sometimes it won't work out because you'll smash a ghost to the ground and the ghost only has 10 hit points left, which means that it's going to disappear before you can use it as an attack item, essentially. But most of the time, I was able to have these strings of situations where you are taking out even ghosts that have items blocking you, like the ones with sunglasses or the ones with shields or whatever. You can destroy those objects by smashing ghosts into them, which to some degree you can argue is, again, makes the combat a little too easy. But I do appreciate that for the first time in Luigi's Mansion, you have a bit of autonomy over how combat works. And I don't necessarily feel like they've weakened the power of just using suction, but it feels a lot harder to have that continuous pull on a ghost, you know?
Yeah, I feel like the health... It would take a long time to suck a ghost from 100 health to 0. Like, I do think you do have to smack them to, like, speed it up. And like, I think combat just feels smoother and faster and more enjoyable, when arguably combat's kind of the weakest part of a game like Luigi's Mansion in some ways. Like, it's all about the exploration, the puzzles, the discovery aspects. So I like that they've made combat more compact, like you feel more in control, like you said, and it just feels smoother and strengthens the whole game overall, I think.
Yeah, and then you also have the burst is what it's called, I guess, where if you are overwhelmed by enemies, you can kind of fart out into the ground and do a little jump.
Really useful, like in so many places.
They use it in a couple of puzzle scenarios as well. Like there's some boss fights where you have to use it to jump over, waves of energy that get shot out. There's a carpet at one point. You have to...
There's like a 2D section, 2D platforming in Luigi's Mansion, which is weird.
Almost, yeah, where you're just jumping over these waves as they come and try and hit you. And it's okay in those scenarios. I wouldn't call it the most action-y thing because it takes time to activate, and the hover is a weird length of time. And then when you fall to the ground, it feels like you can't pick up after that too easily. So, Luigi's Mansion's not really an action game. And I think some of those action elements got a bit frustrating to me, like minimally, in the case of the plunger, and also in the case of situations like in the previous game. Like I think back to the first boss of Luigi's Mansion 1, the baby, where you have to shoot things at it, like basically suck something in, shoot it out as a projectile.
It's like this auto-locking thing, that the game still has, is like auto-lock.
Yeah, it's a projectile thing where you have to, take a watermelon and shoot the watermelon, or a pumpkin and shoot the pumpkin. And the plunger works similarly to that, right? So there will be ghosts that have shields that you have to use the plunger on them to get rid of the shield, because you attach it and then you lock onto it and then you smash it to the ground. And I think because the game is more built around slow exploration and puzzle solving with the plunger more than it is used in combat, when it is used in those situations, it becomes annoying because you can't react fast enough with it, if you know what I mean, right? Like it feels like you don't have the tool set with Luigi. It's not an action game. It just isn't smooth in that way when you're fighting enemies in a big crowd and you want to shoot something to a wall and pull it off and make that happen in a fast manner that's efficient.
I find it like I almost trained myself into only doing it at right angles in order to make it more straightforward. So when I'm in an action situation, maybe against a boss or something, and I need to shoot that plunger, I make sure I'm like aligned perfectly, so I'm not relying as much on angles of auto aim. And that's not a good thing for a game to force you to do. Like, I'm creating my own parameters to make it easier for myself. It should be easy enough anyway, you'd think.
Yeah, it should be, but alas, it sometimes isn't. But I do think that item in particular is used well, for the most part, across the game in terms of the different puzzles you solve and things that you have to use it for. And I think it's just that conjunction generally, right? When you enter a room and you're like, okay, what do I have to do here? You can find yourself like butting up against a wall and you're like, well, I'm just blowing over here and I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. What does the game want from me? And in those scenarios, I found myself just coming across those scenarios relatively often, which I don't know if it speaks to the puzzle design being not necessarily obscure, but a little bit trickier than it has been in the past, or maybe it's just that fact, as we said, you have so many options at your disposal that sometimes you forget about one of them or something like that. Often the thing I needed to do was just the one thing I'd not tried yet and I'd just forgotten about it. And I definitely think some of the puzzles
are more overt than others, like depending on which environment, which floor you're on. Like I definitely maybe enjoyed some of the more overt puzzles that involved like Luigi more, and the fact that Luigi can go through grates and go through pipes, and they've got this nice like green warp pipe theming through the game, which is really nice. Like it's just really well done, and the sound design on Luigi is incredible.
Oh, it's amazing.
It's incredible.
I love it.
It was making Caroline feel quite ill at points. She was like, that just sounds disgusting.
I just love it.
It sounds great.
Trying to squash him through a grate, and it's just like, melty and
so
squishy.
Good. So good.
Brilliant. Luigi is king, really.
Luigi might be one of the strongest aspects of this game, alongside the environments and the bosses, which we can talk a lot more when we're talking spoilers later. But like Luigi just as a puzzle mechanic, and we've not even mentioned the fact this game has co-op, which I've not actually tried. But you can play the whole game as one person as Luigi, one as Luigi, and just handle those puzzles that way, just rather than swapping between the two, because the swapping between the two is actually kind of smooth most of the time, but there are a few more boss situations, action areas, in a similar way to the shooting the plunger, where it can feel a little clunky having to swap between the two. It's certainly more streamlined if you're playing co-op, but I think generally just Luigi, between just opening up the number of options of things you can do, whether it's an extra blowing, extra sucking, or extra weight on something, or using another player just in a separate part of the level. Like, there's so much that Luigi does that I think adds so much to this game generally.
Yeah, I think if you're playing single player, the best usage of Luigi is when you are solving puzzles, when you are like, okay, I need to get over here, but I need Luigi to go over there and blow that thing so that it lifts regular Luigi up. Then regular Luigi can go over there to pull that thing so Luigi can come back into this area. Then he can fall down the hole and activate this switch, which lets regular Luigi go across. It really is a single-player co-op game when it comes down to those things, but it also is just puzzle solving, and Luigi really is just another element to add to puzzle solving. And I think one of the things about this game that struck me as interesting from Nintendo game design perspective is it doesn't necessarily hit you over the head with, like, you can interact with this thing, you know? Most of the time when you feel, I can open a thing with a plunger, it will lock onto it, which gives you the indication that that's an object that you can do something with. But with Luigi, so much of the time it will be not, like, aside from the pipes, which I think are pretty obviously signposted, there are grates and there are barriers that just exist, and they just look like, a barrier that you could...
Signposting's not completely overt, and it's not bright red or something.
It feels more natural. It feels like you are kind of figuring it out on your own, which in some senses is good, because it gives you, I think, a greater sense of satisfaction at figuring it out. Yeah. But then there are also scenarios where you're like, I didn't realize I could interact with that. And there are also inconsistencies to it. There are certainly barriers, like in one of the opening areas, the reception area, if you go up to the top, there are bars that you're stopping you from falling down to your death or whatever to the floor below. Those are there, and they're like ornate, and they have patterns to them and stuff, and they've got blocks, like holes in them, so you're like, clearly Luigi can go through them, but no, that's not an interactable surface, whereas a lot of the iron bars overtly are. So there are situations where it does work, some where it doesn't. It's
and the fact that he's susceptible to water is a nice idea. Like it's because there's different levels where there's random parts of water, and Luigi can interact to stop streams of water, and like some enemies even squirt water at times, and it's just that extra thing to think about, that Luigi is susceptible to water. It's like another thing to look out for. He's not just like an exact clone of Luigi. He has different traits, and that the way that plays into the environmental challenges,
Yeah, I think that it makes sense because he has lower HP. He can infinitely respawn. Like, he doesn't, when he dies, he just goes back into your backpack. So he has his weaknesses, which I think is important, because otherwise you would just want to play the whole game as Luigi, because he's just much more useful in all those situations where he can just get places Luigi can't. And I don't know if there really is anything he can do, or anything Luigi can do that he can't do. I don't think there is, aside...
It's just Luigi has more health, I guess.
Yeah, Luigi's more stocky, and also he can go in puddles of water, really.
Yeah, that's it. That's literally it.
Yeah, because otherwise Luigi's just like overpowered as hell. Like, he's real good. I think overall just the implementation of that idea is great, but it's best implemented in areas where it's slow and you get to take your time and you don't have any pressure surrounding you, because as soon as that starts happening, then it gets a little, like, not terribly tricky. I think the boss fights that do that account for it, but it probably would be easier if, he was implemented in a smoother way. But yeah, there'll be situations where the co-op play will be more enjoyable because you're working together, and there'll be parts of it where one person will just be doing a thing and you'll be doing nothing. Oftentimes that will be the case, and I think in some senses playing as Luigi as the second player, you'll often get to do more than Luigi does, because you can go everywhere Luigi can and then other places as well. So you can just walk along with Luigi, and then as soon as there's a secret area, you can go and do that, but he can't.
What did you think about the structure of this game? I know we're going to talk about environments later and spoilers, but in terms of structure, because obviously the first game was a single mansion, you could more or less freely explore as long as you had the relevant keys. The second game was 4 or 5 different mansions, but then they were kind of siphoned off in awkward, annoying levels, and arguably one of the weaker aspects of that game. And then this game,
so the second game with the levels was like the mansions you went to multiple times, but things about the mansion would change every time you went to them. So like some doors would be shut that you couldn't access, some doors would be open, because it was funneling you down a path that the level dictated, right?
Yeah.
So there was never a point in Luigi's Mansion 2 where you could freely explore any of those mansions on an individual level. They were basically levels, as it were, as opposed to...
And how do you think this game does, where you have 15 different floors that are only connected through an elevator system, and then the elevator system is just like it's just a loading screen, really. But how does that compare? Because for me, it's the best yet. Like you're getting the charm of the first game, where there's that freedom of exploration, but I guess it is siphoned off to within floors.
Yeah, but the floors are open, right? Like
the
floors
are
have
open,
lots of rooms to them. You can kind of go through them whatever order you want to. Obviously, Egad's going to shout at you sometimes and be like, "Go to the dot on your map," and you'll be like, "Fuck off, Egad, I want to explore." But in the sense of, you can go back down to the basement and see, the lab whenever you want to. You can fast travel there, actually, which is nice. They allow you to do that, and you can just fast travel back exactly to where you are.
Yeah, it automatically dumps you back, which is quite nice.
Yeah, which is great, because like if you're right before a boss room and you're like, "Oh, I have to go all the way back to buy some golden bones if I need them," you can just hop back and get them straight away, which is a very smart decision.
And the nature of having the elevator system actually makes backtracking to any single point in the game not actually ever take that long in any case. Like there's a handful of environments where there is quite like a separate staircase or a large number of rooms that can take a little while to backtrack through, but a lot of them are like looped around, or it's just quite easy to get back to that lift shaft and then access any other environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think it really is just the best of both worlds.
It really is.
And when I think about backtracking, like Luigi's Mansion, I think as a cohesive singular place is probably most well designed in the sense of backtracking, where you have doors that relink back to each other, even though when we played through that game earlier this year, neither of us managed to find the key for that one door that meant you didn't have to go round the back and all the way through the gym and all that nonsense. But like that game ostensibly is designed with traditional Nintendo game design, which is, like what they did in Skyward Sword, where you roll a log down thing and then you can get up there faster. It's creating shortcuts for yourself as you go through. And because this game is more segmented, it doesn't do that shortcut thing. So it's not as cohesive in that way. But it is easy to get around, and each of those areas is, self-contained and has those elements to it. Like one of the areas later on in the game, it kind of, you go through rooms and then it switches the way you go through the rooms, and eventually you figure your way out of there. But like going back to retraverse those places to get gems or money or whatever you're looking for is just streamlined as a result. And as we have both kind of talked about off mic, backtracking in this game, when they try to force it on you, it's probably the weakest aspect of the game.
Yeah, definitely. And like, thankfully there's not much of that, and we can like go more into detail with that in spoilers, but
yeah, they do it a few times, like 3 times maybe throughout the course of the game.
It's enough times where I would still argue this game is really lean and it's constantly fresh. And it took me about 12 hours to beat. I know you explored a little bit more than I did. It was nearer to 14 hours. But like, of those 12 hours, maybe like an hour to 2 hours max was anything that wasn't fresh. Like, it felt like there was just so much fresh stuff.
Yeah, it's not overbearing. It just, you get to a point where you're like, oh man, new area, and then it's like, nope, go back, and you're like, okay, I guess. And when they do that, it's not, there's nothing. There's a part you go back and you do find new stuff when you go back. But multiple times you go back and you're like, I'm just going back through this floor again. And what are they doing? Oh, they're going to lock me in and make me do a bunch of ghost fights on the way. Like, they're just going to...
Yeah.
Not necessarily that combat is the weakest part, but it's one of the weaker aspects, I would say, of Luigi's Mansion as a game. So...
if you shaved off a couple of hours of this game and got rid of those aspects and say it was a 10-hour game instead of a 12-hour game, it'd honestly be a stronger game. Like, I'm not saying the game is too short or too long. Like, I think 12 hours is a good length, but like, if you're telling me you can get rid of that backtracking and then make it a 10-hour game, then it is a better game. And knowing that the first game is still actually a pretty great game that holds up, and we played that earlier this year, and that's only a 6 to 7 hour game, if that. They should have just gone lean. If you can go leaner, go leaner. Like, I think the world in which we live in, where games are longer for the sake of being longer because people play a certain number of games each year, I feel like we've moved on from that point, and like, you can afford to make games as lean as possible. And if that means they're a shorter experience, then they're a shorter experience, because there are some great games that are shorter experiences, just as there are long games that are also very lean.
Yeah, I don't know, it's a weird thing because, you know, think about the 10-year-old who gets Luigi's Mansion 3 for Christmas and he doesn't get another game until the summer, maybe. He's got 6 months for Luigi's Mansion. And for that kid, you know, he'll probably be happy that there's extra stuff in the game, that the game keeps going, that it doesn't finish, that it's always got stuff. But to be fair, Luigi's Mansion also has a bunch of other stuff packed into it that I've not even touched.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Isn't that the job of collectibles, not the main story, perhaps? Like, I see that argument.
Yeah, I mean, collectibles certainly help that. Yes, I think I do agree with you in that point, because ultimately the backtracking adds like an hour and a half, 2 hours total, which in the grand scheme of the game, when you factor in the multiplayer that's available, the mini games that they have, the collectibles that you can go after, it's really nothing in the grand scheme of it.
There are mini games?
Oh yeah, like I don't know if you watched the Giant Bomb Quick Look, but there are a bunch of mini games that are based around certain mechanics within the game.
Oh, cool.
I
need to watch that.
They're kind of like Mario Party-esque 8-player affairs that you can play locally, and then there's online multiplayer, which is similar to what they did in Luigi's Mansion 2. Remember, where you have to go up the tower and you have to clear out ghosts and clear out rooms and things like that. Apparently there are like ghosts that are exclusive to that mode, like even harder ghosts than there are in the main game and stuff like that, which is interesting. So maybe we can check that out at some point and see what it's like. But you know, I didn't buy Luigi's Mansion 3 for the online multiplayer. I bought it for the game itself, like the single player stuff. So that's kind of where my priorities laid, and that's kind of what I went after. How do you feel about that hidden stuff, like the collectibles and the gems? Because for me, as I was playing this game, I was being very meticulous. I was trying to, as much as possible, figure out all the mini puzzles there were, and when you hit that moment, you're like, oh yes, I feel really smart for noticing that clue in the environment and finding something. The reward is the gem, and like, it's the gem, but really the reward is that you figured out the mini puzzle and you feel good about it. How do you feel about that stuff?
Yeah, there wasn't a single floor where I got all the gems, actually.
I managed to get it on one of the floors my first time through, and I went back after I beat the game and cleared out the first 3 floors of gems, which I might go back and do them all, because it's actually kind of fun to do that. But
I like stuff like that generally, but I mean, I didn't ever have my heart set on getting all the gems. It was nice to find the ones I could find, and I was always open to looking for them. But I guess near the end of the game, I was like, right, I just want to beat this game, and like I don't really want to work out. I could like maybe see a gem, but couldn't work out how to get it. I might just be like, right, well, let's just keep going, sort of thing, rather than outwardly look for them. But definitely early on, it was very satisfying to just kind of think, oh, what's around this corner? Oh, right, I need to do this. Hoover that up, flash this light, and then I get a gem or something. And that is cool. I think it does give a degree of like it adds that extra layer of exploration, which is very satisfying. So
yes,
it's nice
definitely.
that it's there. It's just maybe not my thing necessarily.
Yeah, and like I'm not generally 100%, or I don't go after these things. And I think the reason I kind of stopped doing it is because I'm like, oh, I have to re-explore all these areas again, and kind of poke around, and I don't know exactly where they are. If I wanted to do it, I should really just have a guide next to me, and at that point, it's like, kind of, what's the point? Like if you have a guide telling you what to do, then it takes away the inherent discovery aspect of it. So yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 in that sense, but I thought it was a really good aspect of the game that could have maybe been additive in terms of having those gems do something.
I really like that they're segmented between floors. Like,
yes,
I think that's a really cool, because...
And they all look different. I like that they're all themed to the floor.
Yeah, and like 100%ing games, when I have done it in the past, it's nice to segment stuff in your mind. So the fact that the game is segmenting it between floors just makes everything feel more clean and more satisfying when you're actually doing it, if that's something you choose to go for.
Yes, there's a consistency to it. It's like there are 6 gems on every floor. Find the 6 gems and you're done with that floor. You don't have to think about that floor anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that for sure. It's definitely a good point to bring up. But yeah, I think just overall, in terms of the vibes of this game, the theming of this game, we were talking a little bit before about this, but this game feels like Disneyland in so many ways. There are so many areas that just have theme park vibes to them. And you were talking about how like Luigi's Mansion generally as a franchise has that because of the haunted house nature of it, and like the haunted house nature of things that you find at theme parks. But I think this really steps it up to another level, and you just have such creativity going on. And I think it takes a little while to get there, right? Because you start off and it's not necessarily doing that much until you hit maybe the 4th or 5th floor you go to.
Yeah, there are peaks in terms of the environments and the bosses where it's just a joy to witness how creative some of these environments and bosses are. And you're right, that maybe it takes a while.
And unique mechanics as well. Like there are one-off mechanics that are there and you're like, oh, this is really cool. And there's one that we can talk about in the spoiler section. I was like, wow. And then they never use it again. You use it in a boss fight and I'm like, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah. There was another one later in the game I want to talk about in the spoiler section where I thought, well, this is definitely coming back, and then it didn't. So it was like,
yeah. So I think that stuff is hardest to talk about without saying, this is the environment we went to and stuff like that, which is best saved probably. But how do you find the music, the soundtrack? Because for me, like, this is actually one of the standout elements of the game. Every place you go to has a different feel to it. Like, because Luigi's Mansion inherently, you're like, oh, spooky music, But because the theming is so vast, every area has a different feel to the soundtrack. And I was playing with headphones for the majority of this game. I was just locked in, with Switch in the dock, big screen in front of me.
Yeah.
It's a strong soundtrack.
The soundtrack is very strong. You're right. It's that theme. It's a spooky theme, but then that theme merged with whatever other theme of the floor you're on.
Yes, totally.
And that just gives each floor such a unique vibe, a unique feel. And that is like the sound, the music you hear when you're in a themed part of a theme park is crucial to the theming of that area. Like, and that's what this game
the feel
really
of
does
it,
well. Yeah.
And Luigi still hums along, I will say, like, in terms of characterization, boy, like, Mario is nothing compared to Luigi. He really doesn't have much of a personality at all in terms of his own games and the stuff that Nintendo tends to do with Mario.
Yeah.
Like, who is Mario? But like Luigi, you can talk about Luigi for days in terms of his characterization, what they do with his facial expressions, like just little noises and things he says. There's moments at the start of the game where like they're talking and like there are things. Like, I'd say there's more dialogue spoken of actual words they say than any other game I've seen in the Mario franchise.
There's some really cool stuff later on that I can maybe talk about in the spoiler section, but like and I just love this series generally for being so juxtaposed to Mario's 3D platforming. Like this game is almost the opposite in every way. Like the character, the fact you can't jump, or I guess you can sort of in this game. But I love how juxtaposed it is, and you're right. It just gives Luigi as a character so much charm, so much character, and like I think it works well having the two brothers where one is so different, just different to the other. And there's really a lot of laugh out loud moments I found in this game. Like really good.
Dude, oh man, there's talk about slapstick comedy that you would like. There was one moment where you're trying to get one of the elevator buttons back and you know, it's hidden somewhere and you got to go back and get it. And it falls out and like there's this shot of just Luigi just standing there with his face just like showing no emotion whatsoever, and it just like bounces off his hat and then falls down and Luigi's like no, and Luigi just standing there just like just not even reacting, and it's just really funny. So they do a lot of that. I think Luigi being a foil for Luigi is great because Luigi is just emotionless, just stands there and doesn't react to anything.
Luigi is the character of Luigi before Luigi's Mansion started as a series. He was just like the extra person.
No character, essentially.
No character, just stood there. I'm the green taller Mario.
Literally, I'm the green Mario.
Exactly.
Like, literally fully green at that point.
And when talking about those elevator buttons, I must say that some of the uses of those buttons and the way that different parts of the game, different bosses play with them and do put them in different places is really impressive and just adds to that charm of the whole thing. It's really cool.
And I was interested because the game starts off and you are going a little bit out of order. Like you go to the 5th floor before you go to the 2nd floor, and so I thought the game would play with that a little bit more. Turns out they at some point they're like, nah, let's just go like 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Like they just go pretty sequentially, which is fine. I maybe would have liked it more if they had, you know, you wouldn't know which floor you're going to next. Not that it matters because they're all different and, you know, it doesn't matter if they're numbered sequentially or not, but I think it may have added a bit more to the feeling that the game was less linear, because the game really is quite linear, and there are, you know, you have the opportunity to go back to previous areas and explore in the middle of the game if you want to, but there's not really any reason to, and the thrust of the narrative is pushing you just towards the top, so it just kind of is linear as the second game is. I mean, the whole series is pretty linear in that sense. It's just
more or less, definitely.
It just kind of obfuscates it somewhat in different ways. But yeah, I don't know, man. There's a lot of other things we can talk about, but I think that will probably get us into spoilery chat. So we'll maybe save that until the end of the show. Last thing I want to say is the one bit of personality of Mario we get is right at the start of the game, and you walk into his room and it's just like empty pizza boxes and like a slipper and just pizza all over the place, and it's like,
if you're a celebrity, what do you expect to do on holiday, you know?
I love it. I love that idea that Mario gets to the hotel. First thing he does, he orders like 6 pizzas and just fucking veggies out in his room. Like, it's great. That's peak fucking comedy. Like, really good stuff there.
And we should say, like, the Virtual Boy, which we've not actually mentioned yet.
Yeah.
It's really awesome how self-referential Nintendo are with the Virtual Boy, because there's a number of references to how...
I wonder if that was a thing Next Level were like, can we do this? And they kind of had to talk to Nintendo higher-ups to be like, it's okay if we poke fun at the Virtual Boy. Has it been long enough? And they're like, yeah, that thing sucked. Fuck that thing. It's good that we've now come back around to the point where we can kind of laugh at the Virtual Boy and be like, that was a failure, lol.
Which is...
Wonder if in a decade's time we'll be able to do that with Wii U and Luigi's Mansion 6, and we have a Wii U gamepad as our thing as we go around.
Has to be.
That will be a good full circle to come around with that. So. Great. But yeah, general thoughts on Luigi's Mansion 3, awesome. I love it. I think
really
it is
good.
So good. And, you know, the physics stuff causes minor frustrations. There were moments where, like, because it's physics, it can fuck things up. like an object just gets stuck in a wall and just keeps clattering about. There was one room where I fucked it up, and it just kept clattering, and even if I reloaded that room, it just wouldn't go away.
MBZ is it's haunted.
It's true.
Something else is doing it, you know? It's not glitched. They hide their own glitches by making it a spooky game. It's like, it's
I guess so. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Perfect. Bally, you should fucking work for PR for Nintendo. I tell you, the spin on that, Jesus. Great. Excellent. Well, we'll talk more about that at the end of the show. But let's talk about some other video games. So, for a long time, Bally, you and I have had our eye on Nidhogg 2 on the Switch eShop. It's a game that we have watched people play online before and have looked at it.
Try and describe Nidhogg 2 to people who don't know what we're talking about.
Oh, jeez.
This is hard.
Nidhogg is a game where you have to run to one end of a map and the other person has to try and stop you. In its most simple terms.
Well, they have to run to the opposite end. Yeah,
they have to run to the opposite end. Yeah. You basically, there are like multiple rooms, and it's all kind of horizontal plane, and it's just 1 versus 1. So it's me versus Bally, and along the way you get different weapons, and you pick up different weapons, and the idea is that you are facing off against each other. The original Nidhogg was basically just fencing, I believe. Yeah. It was just a fencing sword.
You could throw your sword still as well, though, but yeah.
Yes, and you could put it in different positions, like different stances to block and parry and stuff like that. But this one adds a bit more. It adds 3 different weapons, which is like a mini dagger, a bigger great sword, and a bow and arrow. And so those 4 weapons altogether, plus the fencing sword, creates a combination of weapons that you have to use in order to stop the other person from getting to the other side.
I should say it's insta kill, and then you constantly respawn, and you're respawning through chunks through the map, and it's about stringing your kills together to get from A to B.
Basically, yeah. So every time you get respawned in, you'll be in front of the person, which means that I think a lot of people, when they start playing this game, they will try chasing the person. And let me tell you, that doesn't work because they are constantly...
You're gifting them a screen and a half.
You're giving them ground, because if you get behind them and they're running away from you, then they can just kind of get to the end and you will have wasted a bunch of time. And so the best thing to do is, like, if they get past you and you don't have a weapon, just kill yourself off the side of the screen and you'll respawn back in. But boy, is this game a lot of fucking fun. Holy shit. I have seen people play it, and I always thought, like, yeah, this would be a good multiplayer game. And the one thing I have to say is, online multiplayer-wise, it's probably the easiest Nintendo game I've ever had in terms of just getting online and playing against somebody. Like, you think about the fucking train wreck that is Smash Brothers in terms of us playing against each other and how long it takes. It's literally 1 button press in this game, and you're just playing. And I just have to say, like, even back on the Wii U with Trine 2, it was easier than a lot of what Nintendo does with their online implementation. Indie games, somehow, they just understand that playing online needs to be simple and you need to just be able to get in and do it.
Yeah.
And that's what is the case here. You just press a button and you're there and it's done. And there's no lag at all. Like, we had pretty smooth gameplay the entire time we were playing. So, it's...
This game... So, me and Caroline have just moved into a new flat, and this game has given Caroline more anxiety about me shouting at you over Skype and falling out with our neighbours more than anything else so far that makes noise in the flat.
Yeah.
Because we've done a couple of sessions and we really do just shout at each other because...
I mean, we do that in Smash Brothers.
We do that in Smash Brothers.
It's less of the time because there's longer periods of time in Smash Brothers between getting a kill.
Yeah.
Whereas Nidhogg is just like, fuck the arrow. Like, it's just killing me constantly.
Yeah.
And you're just like, balls.
Yeah.
And there are just some really funny situations that can happen. And I think it's interesting because on its face, it sounds simple, right? It's like you have a weapon, they have a weapon, you have to take them down. But each of these weapons is strong against a different weapon, and each of them is able to parry another weapon. So the fencing sword and the dagger have 3 different levels, 3 stances, which means if your dagger is out like in the middle stance and someone shoots an arrow at you, you will automatically parry parry that arrow back at your opponent. And the only way for your opponent to dodge out the way is either to duck, jump, or shoot another arrow at you. And so you have these colliding weapons constantly. You can throw weapons. If you throw the swords and the daggers, you get kills if you hit somebody. If you throw the bow, it stuns them. And so it really is this game of cat and mouse where you are just like scrambling to get a weapon, trying to like stop the other person, and the maps are...
And if they pass you, you can do like a last-ditch throwing of your weapon.
Oh my god.
So satisfying.
The number of times where Bally has got past me and I've thrown my weapon, at the last second he jumps and avoids it and gets into the next room, uncountable. Just like so many times.
There's certain traits that I will always do to you and you always do to me. Like you will always like shoot low arrows. We should also say the arrow and the long sword have two stances, whereas the dagger and the I guess it's a fencing épée have 3 stances. So it's like that 3 versus 2 is a bit weird. But I will always get caught by you shooting low range arrows, and I will always manage to out jump your...
Right, because you can kind of be a dick about it. If you're able to anticipate where your opponent will respawn and when they will respawn, you can send something out before they even have a chance to react, and so they will spawn in and die instantly. And when that happens,
if you get the timing right, I think there's literally nothing they can do. Like it's just
I mean there probably is. I think you have a minor point of invincibility, so you do have some time to react. But when it's happening that fast, it just gotta happen.
Right,
You're like, oh no, what do I do?
It's a lot. It's a lot.
But I think also the level design, like the maps, they're all different maps. One of them is really funny. It's based on packs. Like it's this kind of weird, amorphous...
There's like stalls, like there would be at PAX, like a video game convention. And,
but it's like really weird and messed up. And but each level is built where there will always be height advantages and disadvantages. So there will be high ground and low ground. And like... amount of Star Wars this I was thinking about when playing this game. Like, I have the high ground. And like trying to get someone when they're high up, or dive down to someone when they're below. There's also the kick, which is you can like dive bomb someone with a kick, but also you can like stomp someone's face into the ground. So there will be situations when neither of you have a weapon, you're trying to mash out a button to stomp each other's face into the ground. But I just think the levels are so well designed around the possibilities of swinging momentum, right? And the game really is about momentum, about you continuously making little bits of progress towards the goal, and then sometimes you like get towards the end and your opponent will have a swing back the other way. I don't think we've ever timed out, have we, in terms of the matches? I don't think
so. We kind of go at each other pretty hard, isn't it? Like we don't do too much sitting back.
Like we do sometimes. Like there will be moments where it's a standstill and we're just trying to get our stances, like who's going to react first. Like it's, it's like who shoots first, Han or Greedo situation, where if someone throws their weapon and then it gets deflected, then you're like, oh fuck, I'm done now. I need to like run away.
And like you can pick up weapons, and so as weapons are thrown and more spawning happens, these weapons are left. So if you've thrown your weapon, you're outrunning someone, you can pick up another weapon you just randomly find later that was thrown earlier in the match. So like it does go more and more crazy the longer the match goes.
Yeah, you get these build-ups of like 4 weapons on the ground, and like you throw one, you pick up another, try and like take them off guard. It is it really has such a frantic nature to it. But also there are moments where it's just this standoff and you're just there's just so much tension. This game just evokes tension so well. And it's just a lot of fun. I've had so much good, matches, and I tended to be the one who came out on top a lot of the time. I think you've won a...
Yeah, but that's not to say the matches were that one-sided. I felt so hard done by generally, because I thought I was up in like a good half of the matches. Like I'd feel like I was a screen or 2 away from winning, and then you just fought back. And I think I still only have one or maybe 2 matches now. Like it's not many, and but even though I only won 2, I don't feel like there's a huge discrepancy in our skill. Like, although I do think you have the upper hand, certainly with the majority of weapons, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there are things that we stick to, like my bow and arrow is definitely the thing that's your bane, and that definitely has been working out.
Then I'm always preempting that low shot, so now I'm always trying to spawn with my stance low. So then, but then you'll know that. So is that rock paper scissors effect?
Yeah, it's the mind games. There's definitely, I think this game for me evokes what fighting games do for a lot of other people, right? Like for me, I think Smash Brothers works because we both know how to play Smash Brothers, and we can have mind games with Smash Brothers at a pretty fast pace. But what Nidhogg does for me is it gives me that sense of the decision making and the kind of mind games of fighting games without, you know, the complexity of them.
It distills the best parts and just puts it together in a more simplistic game, but with just as much, if not more fun.
Yes, and it's also a game that has a good level of, not a good level of, but it has platforming to it to the end that you can jump over somebody and you can jump out of the way of a projectile, and you can duck and dodge, and yeah, it definitely has more of those familiar elements to me, which is why I find it more appealing generally. And you know, there are maps that have holes where you'll fall down, and if both of you die at the same time, which has happened frequently, you'll both respawn the same area and no one can move left or right until...
We should make the point that if, say you're the player charging, all you have to do is get from point A to B, whereas if you're the defending player, you do actually have to kill them. So the attacker almost has an advantage in that they have two ways of getting to the next screen, whereas the defender only has one way, where they have to actually kill the opposing player. So when you do have that standoff and you both die and it is neutral, it does mean that you can't move the screen. One player just has to kill the other before anything changes, which is, as you say, it's really tense, and it's a lot.
Also, the look of this game is fucking weird, but I love it. Like the characters,
it is weird. I used to hate it, but now I do quite like it. Like when it first came out, I was like, oh god, that's because it's such a stark change from the first game, which is like it's like a cell shade is the wrong word, but it's a very monotone.
Yeah, it's clean. It's it's definitely, it maybe has more that like shadowy vibe, like Donkey Kong Country shadow level,
right
esqueness to it. So hey man, we should play more of that game. It's really good.
It's really good.
Yeah. So it's kind of been our Smash Brothers recently, I guess.
Yeah.
In some senses. But Smash Brothers did put out a new character. I wasn't planning to talk about this, but hey, I should maybe mention Terry Bogard came out. I played some Terry Bogard. He's fun. Did you watch any of that 45-minute presentation Sakurai did on him as a character?
It was 45 minutes? I didn't even know it was that long. No, I haven't seen it. I've just been a bit busy recently, but that is insane. That was 45 minutes of one character reveal.
It was basically Sakurai being like, okay, boys and girls, let's teach you about SNK. This is a Neo Geo. This is a cartridge.
I'd be up for that because I know nothing about SNK.
Yeah, it's like, so here are recommendations on the eShop for which Fatal Fury games you should play. Here's Fatal Fury Special. Funnily enough, I own Fatal Fury Special on Twitch because it was free on Twitch Prime like 6 months ago or something, so I booted that up and tried to play it, and I'm fucking bad at fighting games. I couldn't.
Does Sakurai have a link to SNK in any way?
No, not other than he grew up playing their games in arcades.
Yeah.
But he did do that, and he played a lot of those in arcades when he was younger. Big fan of the series. Like you can really tell Sakurai is so happy to have this character in the game because it means so much to him. Just the series King of Fighters and Fatal Fury. It's really cool. And Terry is a really cool character. He's the first character to have 2 different side Bs, I believe, because depending on which way he's facing and the way you execute the side B, he does different things. So one of them, if you're facing forward, he does like a charge up kind of punch.
Sorry to be annoying, but I think you'll find that Samus can do a smashed side B, which gives you the missile, the fixed range missile, and then if you just move while you're side special, you do the homing one.
Okay, all right, Mr. fucking Panickety here. To be fair, those are both missiles, though, so fundamentally they're kind of the same thing.
That is true. 2 different types of missile.
Where these are completely different. So the one move is the charging side punch, and the other one is like a backflip kick. And that both of them can really be used for stage recovery as well. So like getting back onto the stage is made a lot easier because his up B recovery isn't great. It's like a kind of spin attack almost, like a twisting like Beyblade upwards almost style thing. And yeah, it's hard to recover with just that, so it's good that he has other options. And he really is a fighting game character, similar to what they did with Ken and Ryu. They have implemented fighting moves if you put in the correct inputs, so you can do a more powerful version of your special attacks if you input them correctly, or if you hold down the button longer, it does a more powerful version. Like his regular B is kind of a fire thing that shoots across the ground, and it's a solid, I like that type of move. Cloud has that type of move. I like characters that have one ranged move that you can use, but also they're mainly physical up there in the grill. Those are my types of characters. So Terry's really fitting that mold really well. And he also has, so basically all the Smash Brothers DLC characters have a gimmick, right? Joker has his rebellion gauge when he calls Arsene. Banjo has the side B with his feathers. Dragon Quest Hero has the mana bar,
the most insane move ever.
Yeah, they all have a gimmick, and so Terry's gimmick is when he hits 100% damage, he gets a thing that says go, which allows him to do 2 different special moves, and they are like fighting game inputs. And so I was able to play quite a few matches with him online and actually kill some people with those special moves because I learned the inputs and was able to do them. So I was feeling pretty cool, pretty hot stuff with that going on. So... And they're really powerful. Like, they hurt a lot. Even at, 50% damage, they can knock you for 6. So, yeah, Terry's great. I really enjoy him. And as a character who I'm just not familiar with that much, haven't really played, it was cool to go and play an SNK fighting game for 10 minutes or whatever it was. I dipped into Fatal Fury Special to just have a look and see and get a bit more appreciation of all the care and attention to detail that Sakurai has paid to this character and the stage and everything and all these other characters that appear in the background. It really is a homage. So shout out to Sakurai for finally getting his best boy in the game. I'm sure he's very happy about that. And the Game Awards is coming, so I'm feeling like we're going to get that final DLC character before round 2 happens, because apparently we're getting 5 more or whatever, season 2. Jesus, the Smash Brothers never ends. Wow. I swear to God, this game is going to have 100 characters by the time it's done. It's never going to stop, is it? It makes sense. Nintendo have really hit on a thing here where Smash Brothers just does most of their marketing for them. It's
their Fortnite, their season.
It is,
their online constant continue. Is it Smash Brothers should be nominated for continuing game or whatever that nomination is
ongoing
called.
Game,
ongoing
best
game,
ongoing game.
This is Nintendo's equivalent.
Yeah, I mean the difference is that this is basically DLC as opposed to live service, because you can, I guess you could call the Spirit events live service, but that's fucking hardly anything. I'm not going to demean myself by even saying that's live service. But yeah, I guess it's one of Nintendo's games that leans more in that direction. So hey, yeah, Smash Brothers. There's another game I was going to talk about. I don't think we have time. I think we've just spent too much time talking about other stuff, so maybe I'll save that for another time. But we're going to take a break here, and we will come back after that with some of your emails. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the show. It's the second segment and that means it's time for your emails. We've got a few emails in, but we can always use more. So please send them in to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. Or you can post a question in our Discord server. We've got a little thread in there for that. You can access our Discord through our Twitter account or the show's description. So our first email this week is from Sean, who is from the internet. Hi, Bally and MBZ. I feel the need to come to the defense of my beloved Link's Awakening again. I'm sure you've heard this defense for old school game mechanics before, but I really think it's worth repeating. As a kid back then, games were an expensive luxury. You might only get a few games in an entire year, and even if you had a ton of money, game releases were sparse anyway. If a game was too easy, it was a bad game. If you could beat it over a weekend, it was likely to get a rent not to buy recommendation from the gaming mags, which obviously a developer wouldn't want. Back then, we wanted our games to last us for weeks, if not months. Having obscure puzzles or obtuse directions in the game was a great way to keep you playing the game for a long time, especially in something like a Game Boy game with incredible limited storage space. I would be stuck on dungeons for days, hitting every wall with my sword, listening out for the change in sound that denoted a bombable wall, or trying every configuration of block pushing, fire, lighting, enemy killing, or whatever it might be. That might not sound fun now, but back then it really was. The game was a mystery that needed to be solved, and when you finally stumbled upon the solution, it was unbelievably rewarding and gave you bragging rights to your mates at school. Nowadays, there are a bajillion games being released on the eShop every week, and there's a bajillion cheap games on sale at any given time, all desperate to get our attention. We don't like it when we feel like games are stalling or padding, because we can't help but think of the other 50 games we could be playing right now. It's a completely different world, and in some ways it's a blessing, but others I do think it's a bit of a curse as well. Anyway, that's my little rant over it. Love the podcast, and I always look forward to listening to you, to both of you talk about Nintendo. As always, keep up the great work, Sean. P.S. I appreciate this is probably too long for the pod, but I just wanted to share my thoughts anyway.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sean, for sending your email in. It was a bit long, so I did cut it down a little bit. So we've cut a little bit from it, but I think, you know, I kind of get what he is getting at here, and I think that is the perspective of a lot of people who grew up with games like the original Legend of Zelda or the original Metroid or anything from the NES or even the Game Boy era. And to be fair, we did grow up in the Game Boy era to some degree, like the latter half of the Game Boy era, and I think we are more forgiving of things like Pokemon. Like Pokemon Blue, there are things in there where, like, you know, to get some HM, you need to go all the way through the Safari Zone and get to the end and you surf over a thing. And like, there are definite things that you knock your head against, and you figure them out by talking to people at school and by looking at guides and things like that. That said, I do think that there are certain things that are just not really worth having these days. And there are things in Link's Awakening that I don't think work now in a current circumstance. And it's not just because there are a billion games being released and everyone's time is a precious resource and we're always wanting to go through something quickly because everyone has access to so many games at this point in time. Like, also, you think about kids these days, and the games they're playing are not, you know, $60 game they get for Christmas. It's Fortnite that they got for free, that they'll play for 3 years, and then they'll move on to something else that's free. And they'll invest their pocket money or their Christmas money into skins and stuff like that, right? It's a different time now, and so, you know, stuff like this is interesting to look back on, but there are just certain design things that for me fundamentally don't work as well.
Yeah, and I think we wouldn't be having this conversation if Link's Awakening wasn't remade. Like, I think it's fair to say that all video games are judged more or less when they came out. Like, yes, some games have aged better than others, but ultimately, even though a game like the original Legend of Zelda might not review that well these days, a lot of people will still say, well, it was hugely important and reviewed incredibly well at the time. And I think that the fact that Link's Awakening has come out as a remake and they were so true to the original in those mechanics has made us think, hey, you know what, like, the game design has changed a lot even since you know, when Link's Awakening came out, in 94. So like, it's interesting to have this discussion, but I agree with you, MBZ. Like, games have evolved in more ways than just simply they have to be shorter because there are like attention spans, and like the video game market is far larger. And I think that generally you could make the argument that more than just games needed to be longer back then. You could argue that like across the board, video games are just getting better and better and better. And in that sense, the mechanics are changing and evolving, and it's not just to do with time constraints or budgets or everything to do with that. It is to do with game design from a level of frustration and what's seen as obtuse versus not. And as you say,
Right.
like there are aspects of Link's Awakening that when judged today are obtuse, but as Sean says, back in the day weren't obtuse. They were just a benefit to the game to make sure it didn't get that tag of rent not buy. And I think
and you also have to think about, like, when you were playing that game when you were younger, you were a kid, right? So your mentality is so different from your mentality today. We would spend hours just grinding the Elite Four to level up our Dragonite and Feraligatr to get them. And I loved doing that. I had no problem just grinding and grinding and grinding. And nowadays, like, I talk shit about Octopath Traveler every opportunity I get because of its grinding. But it was a thing I took joy in when I was playing Pokemon. So it's not necessarily... There's a few factors here, right? One of the other things he said in the email that I didn't read out was... I don't think you can call the game design you talked about on the podcast as being fundamentally bad. It's just the mentality of gamers has changed a huge amount. And I think you can take the second part of that. Mentality of gamers has changed a huge amount. And our mentality from when we were kids has changed a huge amount. But also, I think you can call the game design bad because some of it is just bad. Some of it is not obviously... And it doesn't have to obviously be made clear to the player, but... when it comes to game design, right, you want a challenge that you overcome. Once you overcome it, to feel like I had all the relevant information, I had the skills to do so, and it felt like it wasn't something that stood in my way because I would never have gotten it. And there are a lot of situations in the original Legend of Zelda, in Link's Awakening, even some in Link to the Past, where I'm like, well, no, there isn't enough information here. There isn't. It's not obvious enough. I can't unless I go look up a guide, figure out exactly what is the best way to get through this. And so that I do disagree with, because I do think there are things that are objectively bad in the game design. And it's not that the game as a whole is bad. The game as a whole is a product of its time. But now with hindsight, looking back to it, we can think about how much developers have learned since then, how the industry has progressed since the original Super Mario Brothers. One of the things that I think both of us get very annoyed by is when people put the original Super Mario Brothers on a list of top 100 games. Because that game is not... Like, do you know the end of that game? The end of that game, to get to the final Bowser fight, you have to, by trial and error, figure out a random route, like going on the top platform, the middle platform, or the bottom platform. Otherwise, you're in like a... what do you call it in Zelda? The Lost Forest? The Kokiri Forest? Lost Woods?
Yeah.
It's like a Lost Woods. The end of that game is a Lost Woods situation where you basically have to figure out the correct path up, middle, or down to get to the final Bowser. And there's nothing really good about that game design. I don't think there's nothing interesting. Like, you think about the way Breath of the Wild handled the Lost Woods and the context clues that you get with the wind that blows your, the fire on your lantern. Like, that is the evolved level of that idea where you as a player can figure it out with the context clues you've been given. Whereas the original Super Mario Brothers is literally fucking trial and error. And there's a good kernel in that game design idea, but it's not well executed. And I think in the years since that game, we have really made strides in those type of ideas and keeping some of those ideas because they were kind of good, but if they are done in a way that is more streamlined, makes more sense, is not super easy to do, but has more of a level of challenge that works, that makes sense.
Like, maybe this is a very bad comparison, and call me out if it is. But as I mentioned in the first segment, I'm watching Kind of Funny go through all the Star Wars films, and obviously the prequel trilogy is very close to both our hearts. It's very controversial that I personally think you more or less agree, put them on a level plane with the sequel trilogy and the original trilogy. Like, they're not categorically worse as, in my view, Star Wars stories. I can appreciate the aspects that they are maybe worse films in terms of the acting and the way that the plot is told, but in terms of like actual Star Wars stories and action scenes and other measures that I would maybe measure them differently to other fans, I think they do great. But when you're talking about, so for example, the CGI, like Kind of Funny constantly talk about how bad the CGI is in episodes 1, 2, and 3, and at the time the CGI was maybe I don't know enough about films, but it was some of the best in films at the time, and it has aged arguably quite badly, and maybe episode 3 less so than 1 and 2. But it's that point that yes, CGI, it was great at the time, but CGI has come on leaps and bounds since then. And had George Lucas filmed and shot and edited and put together a Star Wars film now that had as much blue screen as those prequels did, like, it just categorically would look better today if the CGI has progressed so much. So it's
also funny that you say blue screen, because literally episode 2 this was pre-green screen. Like, CGI back then, they used blue screens and not green screens, which is a funny thing, because I remember we both have watched the bonus features on the DVDs and stuff like that, and there are many situations, like especially when Padme is in the compactor in the kind of Geonosis factory area. Like, there's this entire shooting sequence you see of her just like jumping over random blocks and stuff with just a blue screen behind her. So that's how old that CGI is the fact that they don't even use green screen, they use blue screen. Right.
So it's just taking that things have a value when they come out, but likewise aspects of that value can deteriorate over time. And I won't defend the CGI in the prequels and argue that it still holds up fine, because I agree with Kind of Funny. Like, as much as I love the prequels and will defend them, like, they're right about a lot of the CGI. I never knew that not a single clone trooper was real. They are all CGI, and when you rewatch them now, you think, God, yeah, they all look weird and squidgy, and like, and you compare that to the First Order troopers or the stormtroopers from the original trilogy, and you really notice that the live action suits makes a huge difference to something like that. So
I think one of the most obvious ones is you watch Phantom Menace, and for 90% of that film, Yoda is a puppet, and then there's one scene at the end where he's walking, and he is so clearly different.
So they've changed him to CGI actually, and in like the re-release of episode 1, like, he's now CG in episode 1, because in 2 he's CG.
Wait, throughout the whole thing?
Throughout the whole of episode 1, he's now
really?
CG
No,
on the DVD.
He must be. There's still puppet, because when he's sitting in the council chamber, he's still a puppet, isn't he?
The one you're referring to, he is, yes, but I'm saying there's been a re-release since of episode 1 that has him as CGI.
God, maybe that's on the Blu-ray and I just haven't noticed because I haven't gone back and seen it.
And what's interesting about this debate is that in Last Jedi, spoilers here if you haven't seen that film, but
come on.
So Yoda's in The Last Jedi, and what's interesting about Yoda in The Last Jedi is he is a puppet, but he is a CG puppet because obviously he's a Force ghost. So like it's like,
well, he's a puppet, but they put visual effects around him.
Right, exactly. He's a puppet, but he's a puppet superimposed, essentially, I guess.
That's what they did in Return of the Jedi at the end. He's a ghost, but he's a puppet still.
Exactly, puppet ghost. But anyway, my point is that, like, in the same way that CG can age badly in films like the prequels, I think you can say that there are some mechanics in video games that have aged badly, and I think anything that relies on, how do you describe it, poking around or, trial and error.
Yes.
I just think trial and error as a concept in video games is just has reduced considerably year on year since the 90s. And you just don't see it as much. And I think that's a good thing, as we've said. Like, I think that is just how video games have evolved. And it's not just to do with the nature of the industry. It is to do with good game design.
Yeah. I think that another just extenuating factor here is, and as we talked about the mentality of gamers changing, is that there's just so much of everything. Literally, there's too much of everything anywhere at all times constantly. The inundation, the saturation of the media landscape is just unfucking real. Like, you think about just Netflix on its own. A person could spend the rest of their life watching nothing but Netflix and not finish everything on offer, you know? And there are multiple TV streaming services that do that. There are video games that are free everywhere. There are phone games that exist for people's attention. Social media has taken so much of people's attention. It's just this barrage of non-stop stuff. YouTube is a goldmine of just stuff. It's not like 1,000 hours uploaded every hour to YouTube or something absurd like that. Or maybe it's every minute. It's crazy. So fundamentally, because of that shift, because of how easy it is to access media these days, people's attention spans have just reduced to nothing. And so when it comes to something like Link's Awakening, people just want to play that game and not have it take up their time, right? They want to go through it and breeze past it and not have to worry about, oh, I have to look up a guide, I have to find this puzzle, because their time is short and they want to do other things, and there are so many other things competing for that attention. So yeah, I think that kind of gets at the core of the issue. And yeah, you know, like, from a perspective, I totally understand, but also it's not the early 90s anymore. And yes, some of this stuff has aged badly, but yes, it's still legitimate to have those feelings for a game. I will defend Mega Man 2 to the hilt, but you won't catch me saying that it's not bullshit, because it is. It just is fundamentally has a lot of stuff that is complete nonsense and is unfair. It's just a case of, I've enjoyed that game enough to where I've learned it, to where I know where the bullshit is, and I can avoid it. And I think there are too many people out there on the internet who grew up with NES games and are like, well, I mean, come on, you know, I can do this. Why can't you? You know, I grew up in this era where I had to, you know, play this game and learn it inside out. Why can't you do that? And it's like, well, because the times are different, man. These games don't look as good as things that are out right now. They don't play as well. They don't feel as tight in the control department.
Yeah, I feel like the counter to that is, well, here's a sandbox game. Why don't you create a game yourself? Oh, you never tried that? Like, that's a thing that's really... And you've mentioned before, like Patrick Klepek talks about this, where he's not that open to the idea of the sandbox idea, the Minecraft idea. And that is something that I would argue is really commonplace amongst a younger generation of gamers.
Totally, yes.
Where the older, as you say, an older tradition of gamers, they'll be like, everything used to be so hard, now it's all so easy. The opposite of that is, you know, everything used to be so structured, now it's so open. You know, it's kind of...
Right, yeah.
Video games have evolved in so many different ways.
I imagine there are so many kids who played Breath of the Wild and have never done a dungeon or just haven't gone near the castle because they're just futzing around with physics objects and finding the most fun ways to kill bokoblins by, you know, strapping balloons to things and dropping bombs and boulders on top of people and just creating your own fun within the world. And, you know, that's what has defined this generation, is stuff like GTA Online or Minecraft or Fortnite even, which Fortnite has stuff in there which is based around just do a challenge. Don't even focus on winning the game. Just, like, go and find this thing on the map. Like, when I dropped into Fortnite when they did the reset for Chapter 2 on Switch, they basically took a thing straight out of Breath of the Wild / Xenoblade, which is you open up parts of the map as you discover them as you play the game. So the map starts as this shadowed blank thing, and as you explore new areas, you get XP for finding that. And I'm like, motherfuckers, you took this from Xenoblade Chronicles. Like, there's a thing from Xenoblade Chronicles in Fortnite now. And obviously, like, God, Fortnite is like patchwork the game. It's like the game that takes ideas from everything else and is still the most successful thing in the world because it just steals ideas from things, you know? It's crazy. But that's the way things are now. And you may not like it, but that's it.
Good question, and nice defense of Link's Awakening.
It's a good game. I really enjoyed playing that game. But what I'm going to say, I'm going to say undoubtedly, my experience was so much more streamlined because I'd already gone through the bullshit hurdle of playing the original.
Playing the original helps a lot.
And figuring out the nonsense, like pushing the finding the dead fucking chicken under the thing in the town and using the song that you get from the turtle that's hidden under another puzzle halfway across. Can you see what I'm getting at here? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Like, that stuff doesn't fly anymore. It really doesn't.
Our next question is from Jonathan, who's from the internet. Hello, Bally and MBZ. I have 2 questions for you. The first question is, do you wish there were more attempts to imitate the Zelda formula? I find it strange that there have been so many games in recent years that have imitated the style of Metroid and Castlevania, yet so few that have imitated the style of 2D Zelda. I suspect that many developers are scared to make a game in the style of 2D Zelda out of fear that it will be labeled or dismissed as a Zelda clone. I strongly dislike this term and think it's degrading, not to mention unfair. I haven't heard anyone call a first-person shooter that isn't Call of Duty a Call of Duty clone, for example. If this isn't the case, do you think that developers are so intimidated by the popularity and quality of the Zelda series that they think what they make won't be of similar standard? Or is there perhaps another reason? The second question is regarding modern games and puzzle elements or lack thereof. My dad occasionally plays AAA games on PS4 and has commented that he's a bit disappointed that modern games generally don't have many puzzle elements, or that even if they do, they are fairly easy or rudimentary. Do either of you feel that there should be more brain teasers in modern games? Best wishes, Jonathan.
Okay.
Let's go one at a time then.
Yeah, sure. Which one do you want to tackle first?
Maybe the second one first. It's maybe a shorter answer. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued to see how many different types of games your dad plays, Jonathan, and because number of points. First point, I think AAA games that aim to be mainstream, like, I don't know, your God of War, your Spider-Man, I think they would be reticent to put in proper brain teasers into their game because brain teasers by and large are quite Marmite. Like, either you get them and you enjoy them or you don't. And I think that when you're trying to appeal to a wider audience like those games do, it's too risky, arguably, from a reviews perspective, to suddenly stick something in there that's going to divide your fan base otherwise. And obviously there are so many puzzle games out there that are where they're designed to appeal to that demographic, to appeal to the brain teaser demographic. But having said that, there are some Zelda games. I remember one in particular in Twilight Princess. There's one puzzle to get into the dungeon that I would really define as a bit of a brain teaser, and I struggled and needed a guide to get in. But that is rare in games. I appreciate that. But so I'm just sort of saying it can work in a game like a Zelda, and there are some pretty tricky puzzles in Zelda, but that's maybe Zelda has so much more going for it than just purely some of its puzzles, perhaps.
Yeah, I think I would also question, what does he mean by puzzles, right? Because puzzles can be a lot of different things. Professor Layton is a game all about puzzles, and those are more oblique. Like, if there are, if Johnny has 3 apples and Matilda has 7, how many does Patricia have, right? That's a newspaper riddle style maths puzzle. It's oblique. It's just asking a question. You have to figure it out. Versus God of War, where the puzzle is an environmental thing that is an optional thing which will get you a bit of an upgrade if you want to go after it. And I think it's interesting to bring up God of War and Spider-Man because both of those games have puzzles in them, but they are completely optional. And in the case of Spider-Man, you can just say no and skip them, right? Like the stuff in the lab where you're having to chain together, switching around the pluses and the minuses, the voltage, putting it up and down, and just the other one with the colors, like getting the color spectrum all together. All of those puzzles, they put them in there because there are some people who will like that stuff. But I think a lot of people just skip that section and just don't care about it. I don't know what you did when you came to that stuff in Spider-Man, but I did them for a while. I didn't go in depth and do all the puzzles because you can do some optional ones on the side as well. But by the end, I kind of was like, well, I kind of don't want to do this.
Yeah, I did them, but I admit that near the end of the game, every time I hit one, it was a bit like...
I think
I've just been swinging around and now I'm playing with puzzles.
And I think it's because as a concept in terms of the gameplay, it feels more abstract because it it does kind of feel like the sort of thing you would find in a dedicated puzzle game or in a newspaper or whatever. Like, it feels like an almost Sudoku-like thing that isn't Spider-Man, right? I don't think they made it Spider-Man enough in terms of, sure, Peter Parker's a scientist, but like doing a puzzle that is science-based, I would much rather if Spider-Man had, as God of War did, environmental puzzles that were much more about exploring the environment. And, you know, you can call the backpacks puzzles, but also they just show you where they are on the map. Like, that's the thing. They put that stuff on your map. So it's not really, the puzzle isn't anything to do with finding it. It's more just you're getting it because you've gone to where it tells you to go. Whereas in God of War, it's like, okay, there's this area, you can walk through this area, or you can notice that there's a bell over here, and there's another one over there, and there's another one in that corner, and if you are smart enough to throw your axe 3 times, then you'll open a chest, you get a thing that helps your health. And yeah, for me, that's the kind of stuff I personally like in AAA games, is when the puzzles are more environmental. We're talking a little bit about Tomb Raider, like the tombs in Tomb Raider. The modern iteration of the series are so good at that stuff in particular. But you're right, like, these games don't have what you would consider brain teasers, like riddles almost. A modern game, I think, that does have some of that stuff is the Arkham series. Batman Arkham Asylum in particular has, I think all of them have Riddler challenges, where the Riddler will give you a riddle and you have to figure out what it's referring to, and you'll find a trophy or whatever behind the puzzle. So that is more of a traditional style of, hey, there's a brain teaser almost. But I don't know. I just don't know if they necessarily fit. Like, it fits in Batman because the Riddler's a character. It works with the story. Does it work in other contexts? You have to kind of build it around those contexts in order to make it make sense, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I think generally, why doesn't your dad try a few puzzle focused games?
Or oblique puzzle games, yeah.
Exactly. Because there's some really good ones out there.
I think that's the thing, is if he's just playing AAA games on PS4, then that's not where you're going to get good puzzle stuff. You need to go after independent stuff, right? Like, my recommendation would be play Gorogoa. Like, give him Gorogoa, see how he finds that, because that is a game that is 100% puzzle, and it is very brain teasery, but it's also very weird and different. Like, it's kind of unlike anything else. So I would say try stuff like that and see how he finds it. But yeah, back to Zelda. We're talking a lot about Zelda today, I guess.
Yeah.
As always, you know, it's a Nintendo podcast. Got to talk about Zelda.
Why are there fewer 2D Zelda-likes than there are Metroidvanias?
So I thought about this, and I'm like, okay, well, fundamentally, Zelda is a Metroid game. Like, when you think about it, in
Just
a sense,
from a different perspective.
From a different perspective, in a sense, I think the core difference is Metroid is more about, like, areas that are open and you go through them back and forth constantly, whereas Zelda is, there's a hub which is kind of an overworld, and then you have smaller areas you go into where you do the kind of Metroid-y style thing almost, but not really, because it builds on each other, right? So you have to have one item from another place to go to another place. I think because Zelda is, in a sense, a Metroid-type game, all these Metroid-type games are different from one another, right, in the way that they function. So fundamentally, when Castlevania did the Metroid thing, it added a new sense of what you could do within a Metroidvania, right? It added RPG elements, it added items and progression and gear and stats and stuff like that. And then in the modern era, when it comes to Metroidvanias, you don't see games being directly compared to the aesthetics and style of Metroid, because they are, like Ori and the Blind Forest or Guacamelee or Hollow Knight or whatever, they are so divergent in their aesthetic and style and gameplay, really, fundamentally. All three of those games are so different from a playability standpoint, and all the upgrades you get are completely different. Whereas with Zelda, what I tend to find is that you come across things that you could call clones, right? And so he makes the point of, like, Call of Duty clone with first-person shooters. I think the reason that happens more often with people saying Zelda clone is because games that are like Zelda pretty much stick to what Zelda does. They're often in fantasy settings. You use a sword. It's a top-down perspective. You go into dungeons that have themes that are fire or water or wind or whatever. You look at something like Oceanhorn or It'll Do, or what was that one that came out in Blossom Tales, right? Look at all three of those games and you can't tell me that they aren't just Zelda clones, because they're not just cribbing the gameplay, they're cribbing so much more. And I don't think we see enough games like Darksiders, which is a Zelda clone in a sense, but it's much more of its own thing. The combat system is totally different. The environments you go through are like nothing you see in a Zelda game. The story and the setting is, everything about that is completely different. So I wouldn't necessarily call Darksiders a Zelda clone. It's a game that is more similar to what we have with Hollow Knight and Ori and the Blind Forest. I think it's just that we don't get enough of those types of games, which means that for the most part, when we see a game that's trying to be Zelda, it's just trying to be Zelda exactly.
I think I have a theory, and it's based off one of the first points you make, that 2D Zelda and like Metroidvanias are ultimately they're the same video game design from different camera perspectives.
Sure.
And from that, I think it's fair to say that like there has been a 2D renaissance in 2D platformers, and I think on the back of that, there has been a 2D renaissance in Metroidvanias. And what I mean, and why would you make a 2D game over a top-down 2D game? I think it's easier to put your seal, your stamp of identity in terms of what the game feels like from an action platforming perspective. So
yes,
I think it's a lot easier for a game like an Ori and the Blind Forest, like a Guacamelee, to stamp their seal of this is what we're about, because the 2D perspective, like a Metroidvania, it's a lot easier to put your character, put your ideas, put your innovation into it than arguably it is with top down, because it's
right. There's a restrictive nature.
Arguably, there's less action top down. Exactly. There's more freedom the second you open it up to 2D, like a Metroidvania, rather than the top down 2D Zelda style, where I think that you have the danger of being, and it's almost where that phrase clone comes from, like in the sense that it will naturally feel a lot more like a Zelda game by being 2D top down, rather than having the space to create your own platforming system and own feel of getting around the world that you've created.
Totally.
Yeah. And games like Hollow Knight and Ori, not that I've played Ori, but Hollow Knight, like the way that Hollow Knight moves around that world is so intrinsic in part to the design of the world. Like they are linked so fundamentally that to go back and say, like, try and imagine something like a Hollow Knight or an Ori and the Blind Forest from the perspective of a 2D Zelda. It would lose so much, not just from action, but
right
from visually, like how you represent that world. Like worlds just look better in a sense, arguably in some ways, from that 2D perspective, because you can do all sorts of depth with a game like Tropical Freeze, or like there's so much you can do in terms of that depth and what you can represent with that world than you can versus top-down 2D Zelda. Just a theory.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree, I would argue that Hyper Light Drifter is a game that is evoking Zelda, but it doesn't evoke it in the ways that you would expect, because it doesn't really have dungeons per se. It doesn't really have like progression in terms of getting items that will be used to open up the next area. It's more of a top-down action game, which from that perspective it's much more like the original Legend of Zelda, right? And we have talked about how Breath of the Wild is a lot more similar to the original Legend of Zelda than it is to any other game in the series. So if we're talking about games that imitate the Zelda formula, there are two Zelda formulas, right? There's the Zelda formula of the original and of Breath of the Wild, which is it's an open exploration, go anywhere action game, versus the more structured, gated progression of everything from Link to the Past to Skyward Sword. So that kind of gated one is much more down the Metroid side of things, versus the original Zelda, which is a game that Hyper Light Drifter is cribbing from a lot more than what it turned into. So yeah, even within the Zelda series, there are multiple Zelda formulas that you can kind of stratify at this point. So it's a curious series, and I do think it's because Zelda is, as we have said, almost an offshoot of Metroid. The games that try to be Zelda, they are inherently an offshoot of an offshoot. So they're like an iteration on an iteration on an iteration, which will make them feel naturally like something that is so much closer than the original idea in essence. Which is it's a thing to think about. Certainly, it's definitely an interesting perspective.
It's a good question, and I'd be intrigued to look back at this question in 10 years' time and see if we're going to continue to get as many sort of Metroidvanias as we've been getting, or whether there might be, more top-down 2D Zelda experiences.
I do think that I think it's the restriction of budget, right? Because when we talk about independent games, you can make a Metroid game because it's 2D. You can't make a big 3D Zelda if you're an indie studio. Like, most indie studios can't at this point. Which means I think the ones that stand out, as we mentioned, Darksiders, Okami, Beyond Good and Evil, those are all fundamentally Zelda games to some degree or another.
But they're all big budgets, right?
But they all look so different. They all have such different mechanics and different worlds. And I think it's so much easier to stand out visually distinctly as a game like that versus a top-down game. Which is why we see less Zelda in video games, because it requires a bigger studio to go out on a limb to do something similar. And it just doesn't happen often enough. Those 3 games, they all came out years and years ago, and they came out over a period of years. So I don't know, how would you define Okami as a Zelda clone, Bally, or do you think it's more than that?
I'd call it Zelda-like. I agree. I don't like the word clone. And I'd rate like a bit like the word Metroidvania, like it's that type of game.
It's a genre almost.
Yeah, it's a genre. It's almost a genre. It's one of many different sort of third-person genres that there have been, like, in the last 10, 20 years,
Yeah, like, I mean, going back to rotating around to God of War again, like, God of War is kind of, in some senses, Ocarina of Time. Like, it's limited open area with some gated progression based on what abilities you have in a little bit of it. So, it all wraps back around, essentially.
Yeah. Good question. Thanks for writing in.
Great. Well, that's going to wrap us up for the regular portion of the show. Obviously, stay tuned if you want to hear us talk about Luigi's Mansion 3 and spoilers, but let's just kind of maybe do our plugs and get out of here for the regular folks. You can find us all over the internet, and you can obviously talk to us in various places. One of the ways to do that is to send us some more emails, which Bally will remind you of the email address so we can get some more of those for next time.
Please send them to ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com. That is ThisNintendoLife@gmail.com.
Brilliant. You can find us in various places over the interwebs. On Twitter, you can follow @TNL Podcast, which is the podcast Twitter account. Has updates on Discord, YouTube, links there, and all the things that we're doing. Updating you on the plans for the future, when shows come out, things like that. You can find me at LordNBZ, and I'm just tweeting things, I guess, telling you how many pages I am deep into the Shadow Rising.
Complete with pictures
of the amount of pages I've read, and how 100 pages looks like nothing when you have a book that's 974 pages long. It's a good time. Bally, where can I find you?
I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91. I've not been tweeting much recently. I need to get back into the.
You've been building IKEA furniture, man. You should get some of those pictures up on Twitter of you building IKEA.
That's
stuff.
A good one. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, good.
Caroline's pointing at herself, saying that she's been building most of the furniture.
Oh,
so I'll definitely put pictures up and say that Caroline built most of the furniture.
Yes, 100%. Credit where credit is due. Great. You can find us in loads of places on the internet. We are on Spotify, on Stitcher, on TuneIn, on something else. I don't know. iTunes, that's the one. It's the big one. The thing, you know what? we've kept saying iTunes for however many years. Apparently, like 3 years ago, they switched over to Apple Podcasts, is what they call it now. So we're on Apple Podcasts, I guess.
Oh,
don't know why I never made that switch in my brain, but whatever. To Apple, everyone knows what iTunes is, though. It's really stupid. Anyway, find us there, review us.
Was there a time when iTunes was the only way to listen to a podcast?
Maybe, I think at some point. I mean, RSS feeds have always existed, so you're always able to get stuff through RSS feeds. But yeah, you can find us there, and please review us. That would be really nice. It's coming up to Christmas. Nice Christmas present. Give us a review. Another nice Christmas present you could give us is to become a patron on patreon.com/ThisNintendoLife. We have some patrons to thank, Bally.
Yes, thank you to our two $10 tier patrons. They are my fiancée Caroline and Atari Alex. Thank you for your support, and thank you to all of our other patrons. Your support is hugely appreciated. We're coming to the end of the year, and there's some pretty great Patreon shows coming out. I mean, we've got Game of the Year coming. That's coming in December, so...
Yeah, in December we'll have our Nintendo Game of the Year show for games that didn't come out on Nintendo platforms, which will be fun. So get on the Patreon and you can listen to those as well. That is going to do it, though, I think, pretty much. So thanks for listening, folks, and stick around after the break if you want to hear us chat about the spoiler-filled nature of Luigi's Mansion 3. But until then, thanks very much for listening, and see you soon. Bye-bye. Alright, folks, welcome back to Luigi's Mansion 3. Time for spoilers. Give you like 5 seconds to run away in case... You know, I put a music break probably between this. Or maybe I did the end credits. Who knows what I did, Bally. This is all, in the future when I've edited this podcast and it's on the internet. But hopefully that gives some people time.
You've got to give people who are driving a chance to pull over at the side of the road, pause their podcast. Or go
you know what I do when I'm driving is because I have a speaker. If someone starts spouting spoilers of something, I can just press the button to turn the speaker off. So that's what I tend to do most of the time if that happens. But then you're like, oh, fuck's sake, now I have
no podcast.
Now I have to wait for a traffic light, and then the traffic light comes. I have to fumble quickly, make sure I don't mess up the traffic light.
Oh, God, yeah.
It's a thing you shouldn't be doing in a car, but it's what we have to do when we must have podcasts on all the time.
You can't be driving without any podcast.
No, I can't. It's a waste. Literally, there's too much time being wasted if I'm doing that.
Complete waste of time.
It is, really. It's just... God, I hate how we commoditize our lives like this, but we do.
I think everyone's pulled over. They know Luigi's Mansion spoilers are coming now. So
cool. All right, Luigi's Mansion spoilers. What did you love about this game, Bally? Just go crazy. What was your favorite things?
My favorite thing was before the final boss, going up the stairs with Mario.
Oh, yes.
And Mario pops out randomly, and he's like jumping like he's obviously Mario from, a 3D.
Dude, Mario's just fucking flexing all over this
and
game.
He's like wall jumping and stuff, but as you're going up the stairs, he pops out from around the corner like, come on, Luigi, and he like absolutely startles Luigi. So funny.
I know I did say that like Mario never gets personality, but I think Next Level have given him more personality in this game than he's ever been given.
Yeah.
Simply because they just make him the confident, arrogant, not necessarily arrogant, but like he's not trying to be arrogant. He just naturally is,
He's just confident and bubbly.
He's just naturally talented and just doesn't really think about Luigi. And he's like, come on, bro, like, look at me. I can do this. Why can't you get up to the top of this thing faster? And obviously, he ends up getting turned into a painting again. Him and Peach do. It's funny how they use the Polterpup constantly as a means to get Luigi out of a situation, because Luigi's standing there as well, as dumbfounded as anyone else. And I think this happens the first time everyone gets put into paintings.
And
Polterpup just jumps out.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying the Polterpup just knocks Luigi out the way. And helps him, essentially.
It's right before the final boss, where after the stairs, and you've got the last bit of the top of the hotel, and Mario literally is wall jumping up the middle, and Luigi has to like walk around the ladders up the side.
He's just like going around the side of a really big open boo, and he's so just like shivering as he's trying to just skirt his way. They prelude that with Mario just does a long jump, and then Luigi has to go across crumbling little brick.
Like straight out of Mario 64 long
It's really
jump.
Good. Yeah, it's really good. I definitely think that stuff is well done from just character standpoint, as little character as any Mario
it's
universe.
The most character you've ever seen anything Mushroom Kingdom related, I would argue, like in this game.
Maybe, like there are definitely other games that have lent into that direction.
Yeah, Odyssey's good actually. Odyssey's got some cool cutscenes where Mario, Peach and Bowser have some funny interactions for sure. But this, I think, is next level, you might say.
Oh wow, boy. Oh jeez. Okay. I think the best thing to talk about is just all the different areas. First up, was there any area that stood out to you as a favorite in particular? One that you, as soon as you got there, you're like, oh man, I'm really into this game now.
I was already into the game long before making that area, but probably the pirates, the Caribbean style area.
When I mentioned the music in the first segment, it was mainly because I got to this area and I was like, man, they've done a real good job of mixing piratey feeling music with horror feeling music. It's just really good. But
the moment that hit me first was actually the piano boss. Like,
yes,
that was
I agree
the moment
with that.
I was like, wow, this game is way more awesome than I thought it was going to be.
Well, it's because all the bosses before that are just kind of, they're more Luigi's Mansion 1 style portrait.
Yeah, definitely.
Ghosts, right? Because like Luigi's Mansion 1, it has a lot of portrait ghosts, but a lot of them are kind of simple and low key. There is like a music guy who plays the piano, I think, or is it? It's one of the ghosts. Maybe it's a female ghost.
There is one that plays the piano, yeah.
And she plays the Mario theme, doesn't she, or the Mario 3 theme on the piano? That was the thing I remember. But it's not an extravagant boss fight, and so like the chef and the kind of woman with the suitcase inside her, the maid, and the security guard guy, like those are all fun fights, but they're more localized. They're like smaller fights, and then when you get into the piano room, it's like, okay, this entire area, all the chairs are flying through the air and smashing down. You have to shoot a bomb inside of him and it explodes. You have to use the jump to dodge over his waves. It's really the first real big boss fight of the game. And then from there, it just keeps going up and up and up. And it's like, oh, okay, we're really doing big things here.
But with the piano boss, like it's the concert hall design where you're on that level and there's the area where you're meant to queue and this, that, and that whole Nintendo Capri Sun idea of like, this would be a nice place to sleep. Like this game just has infinite numbers of nice places to be. Like this is a nicely designed room. Like it feels,
despite it being a haunted house.
Despite it being a haunted house, there's actually a lot of really nice places to be. And like this concert theater just feels like a concert theater. And then it's a good example of this in the dinosaur boss, where the intro to the boss is very, very small, but it's like a nice scene setter. And we were just saying off mic, but the two best things of this game are the environments and the bosses. And these two areas, the dinosaur area and the concert theater area, are good examples of where it's just a really quick intro, setting the scene. It's a nice environment, and then you're into the middle of an awesome boss fight. And like, it's just such high quality and so densely packed with like solid, interesting stuff. These fights and just that area, like it's just so well done.
And they all have different mechanics. They all like make you try and approach them in a different way, even if they do some similar things, like the wave of energy that comes out. Like the final boss does that, the piano does that. I think there's another one that does it as well. One of my favorite areas, actually, because of its structure and just the way it looks, is the garden.
Really
the garden
impressive,
is really cool because it's built around this tree that you wind all the way up.
Yeah.
And as you go, you find areas that you have to do a lot of horizontal stuff. Vertical stuff, where you're trying to, bounce on mushrooms to get to higher platforms and move like places around to get that working. And then you find a fucking chain blade that you start using, and I spent, I don't know, 10 minutes in that room destroying everything with that thing. I just literally went around and interacted with every object I possibly could to destroy everything.
And they give you a lot of stuff to interact with in that room because they know you're going to do that. Like, it's a really nice design.
But the thing is, like, the bed is built so that different parts of it break depending on where you use it. Like the balustrades or whatever you call them that hold up the kind of twin poster or whatever, they break differently to the main bed itself, and then the mattress and the pillows and all of it explodes. And I think that is the thing where I loved using the vacuum on everything, and then that was another new unique item that I'm like, well, I'm just going to use this on everything just because it's fun and it feels good and it looks really great when you destroy things. It's just so well done.
That chainsaw, like, it doesn't stick around long, and it's really great that they don't overuse that mechanic. However, there's another mechanic later in the game actually to access the pirate area. Basically the super, it's a plug at the side of
tornado.
Yeah, to get the tornado. I cannot believe that never returned after that plug. You go on the whole mini side quest to go and get it.
So it does. There's one area where you use it again.
Is there?
Yeah, if you go back to the movie area, I can't remember if this was part of the main quest. It might have been when I was chasing the cat. I think it was when I was chasing the cat back to the movie area. There is a plug there that you can use to destroy the part before the big city, or the mini city where you do the Godzilla stuff.
Okay.
But I didn't see it outside of that as well. I thought it might be a thing that would come into a final boss scenario.
I totally thought it was going to be final boss, and like this was, so quite surprised it wasn't.
It was really weird because it's like, I don't know, there was no point to it. Like, I get it was an artificial barrier to stop you from getting through the pirate ship that had blocked the way forward.
But then it was also that mini quest where you go and rescue Toad, and you have to do it, and you have to go all the way back around that area, which it wasn't a whole lot of fun. But I mean, there's a cool little cutscene where you're watching a video from the point of view of Toad, and you see his arms and he's climbing up, and that's how you have to work out where Toad is.
Oh, right. Yes.
That was really quite interesting, quite cool. Wasn't expecting that.
I mean, I think in Luigi's Mansion 2 you could do this, but I never tire of just shooting Toad at shit. Like, just sucking in Toad and using him as a projectile is great. And there are multiple puzzles in that basement area where you have to reflect him off a bunch of things to get some coins or gems and things like that. And I really enjoyed doing that. It's just very funny. But one thing that did frustrate me a lot of the time was when there would be objects that were projectiles mixed in with just random money and stuff you were trying to suck, because I'd often try and get all the money, but then I'd accidentally suck in a projectile and it would block up your...
I think the game on purpose there were a number of areas where they throw quite a lot of enemies at you, and there were objects put there on purpose to get sucked up by accident, almost to make it more frustrating on purpose.
I don't like that.
It's not great. I'll give you that, because you always have to suck them up and then blow them to the other side of the room and then start flashing and sucking up the ghosts. But
I think in terms of the backtracking, right? Because I think when we talk about the pirate area and the dinosaur fossil, museum area that comes to life, which, God, that area is great.
Did you notice with the fossil, with the museum area, there's thunder and lightning going on outside, and then between each thunder and lightning, the angle of the Tyrannosaurus Rex's head changes in the lightning.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's the first thing I spotted. It's like that enemy in Doctor Who, the angels that only move in when your eyes are closed.
You're right.
Yeah. It was like that. I was like, this is freaky. Really cool.
Yeah, that's a good boss fight as well.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, no, I was just saying those shorter areas, the pirate area and, of course, the fossil area are preceded or followed by a sequence where you have to backtrack and a cat. Basically, you get to the elevator, you're like, here comes the elevator button, and then artificially a cat comes out of nowhere. I think it's Helen's cat, Helen Gravely's cat, and it steals the button and runs away. And you're like, oh, okay, well, then you have to go back through the area, and then there's a point where it goes through the floor.
Yeah,
like,
the point that goes through the floor, you're like, oh, God.
Yes, that was where I was like, boy, well, are we doing this? I guess we are. Which, like, it's fine, but I think it is the weakest stuff in the game because you are just going back to a place you've already been, and all you're doing is fighting more ghosts and just doing a kind of mini-game-esque thing to get the elevator button out of the cat. And the cat looks really cool. It's a cool designed enemy, and I think it works well, but yeah, it wasn't one of the best things about the game, for sure.
No. And then, like, as you said, Len, we said in the first segment, like, it's a very short part of the overall game was backtracking. If you can also roll in maybe that extra Toad quest thing where you have to go to B2 again, and it's not the best, that area, but it's still a small part of a much wider, larger, better game.
Yeah, totally. But I do think that this game has such strength in its one-off mechanics, right? Because we talk about the chainsaw. There's also, I think this was the one that was hard to figure out, and like Egad's tips helped, and we talked about it a little bit, was the movie set puzzle where you have to get the bucket from the center, take it to the well that gets filled up. It's
hard, but I was very chuffed with myself once I worked it out, you know. Like,
I mean, it took me a while to go through because I went to every area individually, and at first you don't know that you have to put Luigi in front of the camera so that when you look through the camera, you are then controlling the scene. It's a real weird one-off thing that they do that just never comes back again. It's really neat, and then the boss is amazing because you go into that city and you're fucking Godzilla Luigi, and you're just stomping around.
Such cool design.
And I do like. So, like, there are implementations of Luigi in boss fights that I enjoyed. One of them was this one where you have to get him out and both of you, with the power of your blast, push the ball back in order to do damage to him, which it's pretty cool. I got like some good screenshots and stuff. Like, I took a lot of screenshots in this game because there were so many moments that I thought were really fantastic. And I think this is the area, like the pirate area I was telling you, that is the part of the game where I most felt like I'm on a Disney ride. Like, I'm standing in line or I'm in a Disney. It felt like going to Epcot and those kind of themed areas that are based after countries and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There's that one area that has, or I remember there being like a boat ride that goes from area to area, and it's like at the back of one of those. I don't know if that's still there.
The boat ride is at the back of the Mexico Pavilion.
Okay, does that go around?
Oh,
it stays within Mexico. It doesn't go to different ones. I always thought that, because we never went on it, I thought it would like go to all the areas and stuff, which would be cool. But yeah, and then when you go into the main area where the big pirate ship is, you see the back ceiling with stuff painted on it, and it's like, man, this gives me real Truman Show vibes of like, this is not a real.
Yeah, I got that a lot with the pyramid area where you can see the back and just these rooms that look outdoors, but you're actually still in this hotel.
You're still indoors. Yeah. The pyramid, and God, I almost went around sucking up every fucking grain of sand in that pyramid area. I almost did that.
All you have to do is press X on the other, like, pharaoh cat thing that's standing, because it took me ages as well, and then I was
no, I wasn't. That wasn't me trying to figure out how to get in there.
Because it took me ages to get into.
Oh, did it? Yeah, because that was just me on my own personal adventure to suck up every grain of sand. I just wanted to clear it out to do that because I thought it'd be fun. Like, I love the all the artwork of Luigi as an Egyptian. Yes. Really good stuff like that.
Really good.
That area is great, and I don't think that boss is great. The Egyptian boss, it's
pretty
annoying.
Good. It's okay. It's not. Yeah. It's not the top tier. My top tier bosses were probably,
I would say, the fossil dinosaur and the Godzilla boss.
The Godzilla, the shark, I would argue, from the pirate
So the shark for me leans into that territory where the final boss did as well, where I don't think you quite have enough time to do the plunger to hang on when he tips the ship, you know? When he tips the ship that you fall down, you need to use the plunger and then hang on to it.
But when you do hang on, what a spectacle that is. I was like, wow. Like it's like a mini cutscene.
I never saw it because I failed that every time.
Man.
So I'm bummed.
The camera zooms right out and the whole boat tips up, like almost the boat tipping in the Wind Waker level in Smash Brothers or something like it.
Or if we're continuing our theme park theme, like a banana boat flipping back and forth, you know? Almost
just like that.
Sense. So I really liked those areas. There are some weaker parts. There's the fitness studio, which was fine. I didn't think anything special about that.
When I first found out it was a fitness studio, I was a bit bummed out. But then by the time you get to the boss, I thought the boss was actually really innovative in what you had to do, where Luigi went to the other side of the level, and then you turn up like the suction
temperature
thing to get
I thought it was the temperature, but it seems like it was the suction thing at the bottom.
I thought it was temperature as well, but then the water sucks out of the swimming pool and
and you have to hide him behind the pillar to not get hit as well. Because I was like, I don't have enough time to do this in one thing where I poop out Luigi and then he goes, or Luigi, and he goes and does it, because the boss recovers in time in order to hit Luigi and mess it up. You need to have more time to fully extend.
And then like a more complicated version almost of that boss is sort of the second last boss with Mrs. Thingamy Gravely. Like she's got that whole underground network where Luigi's walking around, and I found that boss quite tough actually, but it was very cool, the idea that Luigi can do stuff.
It is tricky because you are having to compartmentalize, like doing two things at once, because if you leave Luigi on his own for too long, he'll be attacked by her. And you want to find that balance. Like, I never tried to get rid of all four of them. I basically tried to get rid of two of the beams so that I had enough space, and then kind of went from there, because it would have been way too much effort otherwise. It would have just not worked. I think like the Twisted Suite was fine. I think the gimmick of it, where you go through the rooms that don't link to where you think they link to, and they get randomized, is like a little bit of it wasn't annoying necessarily, but it was like a bit time consuming.
I'm glad it's in the game in the sense that when you have a hotel that's doing so many wacky different things, I wanted a floor that was more traditional, just to make everything else stand out more. Now, it was more traditional in a weird way, where the entrance to the hotel is very Art Deco, but then this floor was even more traditional than that. So like it was weird, but I'm glad that there were some more traditional elements to the hotel, not just pure. We were talking about like the Truman Show with the pirate ship. Like it just feels, it's like a theme park ride shoehorned into a floor.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a hotel.
Yeah. So I'm glad there were floors that felt more like a hotel. Like the concert room feels like, oh, that's a cool idea. There's a concert room in the hotel. There's a gym in the hotel. There's a sort of library area where I guess that's where most of the the three bosses, I've forgotten, the Twisted
Suites.
Twisted Suites, exactly. So it's a lot, but I love the variety. It's so fresh, and I actually, I know we're about to talk about the final boss, and I actually liked the difficulty in the game throughout. It was a good level. It wasn't too hard, but at the same time not too easy.
Yeah, I mean the bones mitigate a lot of the problems you can have. I for whatever reason I never had loads of bones with me at once, because I don't know, I wanted to get a better mansion at the end. I ended up
I just hated the idea of game overing and having to start something again. And if there was a part of the game that was like going to allow me to avoid that, I wanted to put all the money I could into it, which is what I more or less did. So at every point I was able to go back and the shop would restock to the point where by the end of the game, for the final boss, I had 10 bones going into it. So I knew that even if I was struggling a lot with the final boss, I'd be able to, persevere and not have to restart.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. The thing that I really liked about this game was some of the ways in which you got the gems, some of the puzzles that were associated with them. There's one, I don't know if you found it, in the disco area, where if you use Luigi to rotate the vinyls, it will poke a little block out of the wall, So the block is not actually like it's a brick wall, and it pokes like a square out of it, and you use Luigi with the burst ability, like in a Mario game, to jump and hit the block multiple times, and coins pop out of it, and then a gem pops out of it.
See, I got the block, and then I didn't know what to do with the block. And so I moved on.
Yep. I saw the block, and immediately I was like, oh my god, they're really doing this reference here, and it was brilliant.
That is cool. That is very
I took
cool.
a video of that as well, so I've got that I might show you at some point. I don't know other things to talk about in this game.
Final boss.
Aside from that, I think one of the other hidden gems I thought the thing with those generally is some of them are obvious, some of them are you feel really good for figuring them out. So there is a mermaid statue in the pirate area, and if you knock down the coconuts from the tree, you can aim them at the mermaid statue that's in the water, hit her 3 times, and the statue breaks, like it knocks off her head, then knocks off her body, and then her tail, and you get a gem from it. And I'm like,
cool.
Stuff like that is really clever because it's environmental puzzle solving, and just it's really smart. So I liked those types of ones. There are some of the gems which I think probably maybe a little too obscure, but generally it was pretty strong. But yeah, final boss. Talk to me about that, Bally.
Yeah, I thought the final boss was actually really cool. The thing that stands out in my mind the most is when King Boo is using his tongue on you, and just the amount of liquid coming off the tongue is just like...
God,
so...
I fucking hated those tongues so much, not only because they look disgusting, but because they hit me all the fucking time. Like, constantly got hit by those. Also, when he does the wavy tongue thing, I could never nail the window in which I had to duck under it or whatever. It just never worked for me. So that was part of my frustration. That was one of the worst moves he could do against you. But like, I just feel the timing window to suck up the bomb, aim it, shoot it, get it to the right boo was such a pain in the fucking arse. I really disliked that as a fundamental of the end of the game. It reminds me of the final boss of Luigi's Mansion 1, where there's a lot of tight timing windows there to hit Bowser properly and knock off the head and whatever. I just think Luigi's Mansion needs to focus on more slow and deliberate stuff, as part of why I didn't like the shark boss as much either, because that was also to do with tight timing windows.
They just needed to make the windows a bit bigger because, as you say, the auto-aiming isn't perfect. Like it's
and also because part of the boss fight is the puzzle of figuring out what you have to do, and so you don't get enough time to do that before it assaults you with time's up. It just that was the thing that screwed me over multiple times. But generally I think the game's not too hard. It's just I found that final boss frustrating in that it took me way too long to do, and I was like, it was like 11:30 or something, and I was like, I just want to fucking finish this boss. But
I mean, overall I thought this game was going to be Luigi's Mansion 2 but in a hotel and then with a few different environments, and it is so much more than that. Like, I was really surprised, pleasantly pleased overall with like the sheer design and character put into those boss fights and environments is top notch by like next level games, like above what they went for with Luigi's Mansion 2. As much as that was a step up from the first game, this is maybe an even greater step up in many ways than
I would say.
jump.
For sure,
definitely. Like it's actually now probably one of my favorite games on Switch, and like I didn't think I'd say that before playing this game. I thought it was just gonna be Luigi's Mansion. It was gonna be a lot of fun. But ultimately, Luigi's Mansion is in many ways a bit of a B-tier Nintendo property. Like it's not up there with their big ones. And for me, this game sits there with the big ones in many ways.
Yeah, I really loved it. I think it's a game of surprises, and I think both of us, when we talk about the games we like a lot, surprise has a lot to do with that. And Luigi is just filled with constant, new things that are happening, and I really like that about it. It really nails a lot of what it's going for, and it's not trying to do something groundbreaking. It's still fundamentally Luigi's Mansion, but I think they have gotten to this point where they have perfected the formula of what that can be, and have really just nailed it down. So
I'd really struggle to think what you could do with a sequel to this game, or whether Luigi's Mansion maybe needs to have a break for a while or go in a different direction.
I mean, we've had 3 games in 20 years, so it's not like a game franchise.
It's not like it comes out all the time.
Yeah, it's no Call of Duty as Luigi's Mansion, is it? It certainly it takes its time, but I think it's because it was revived in 2013. That was the big thing. I also like to mention that I think I went back and listened because I was like, was this talked about? Luigi's Mansion 2 was one of the first games you talked about on the podcast. Episode 1, you talked about Spirit Tracks and Luigi's Mansion 2. And you were very positive on Luigi's Mansion 2. You loved it.
Honestly, that game has aged quite badly in my mind, mainly due to the level design and
also because Caroline played it and you realized how frustrated she got with a lot of it.
Yeah, it's not good, and when you die, you go all the way back to the start of the level, and for a game with bosses, that's just crazy. Like, that's not good checkpointing at all.
Yeah, speaking of saving and checkpointing, this game's really fucking good at that. It saves every time you enter a door. Wow, it does a great job of just putting you exactly where you want to be, I think.
And it does that very almost non-Nintendo thing that I guess they've done with Breath of the Wild and now this game, where you go back into a save file and you can see the last 3 autosaves. It's that's a really, I would argue, much more Western thing that other companies have done for ages. Yeah,
it's a fucking PC game thing that you don't see, but I'm so glad. I mean, Next Level are a Western studio, so credit to them for doing that, but you just don't see that sort of stuff in Nintendo's products generally. And I think it just streamlines the experience so much more by adding stuff like that in. So yeah. Any final thoughts? Anything that you wanted to bring up that we didn't mention yet? I mean, we've talked a lot about Luigi's Mansion this week. Really got it out of our system, I think.
Yeah, I was spoiled on a couple of the areas from E3, but even with...
I'm so glad I wasn't, because that Godzilla one apparently was shown.
Well done for avoiding those. So I knew about the medieval world and the film world.
Yeah, I knew about the medieval world, but I just didn't watch further in it. And I saw the start of the movie area, but I didn't watch further.
Even knowing about that medieval world, getting to it, and then some of the puzzles with Luigi and the spikes and avoiding this, and it was just such a joy to play. Like, it was so well done, and I think that's quite one of the more early themed worlds you get to. I guess you get to that shopping area and the kitchen soon, but then you get to the medieval world and it's like, wow, this is thematic, and
yes,
it just really set the tone for how the rest of the game was going to go. And apart from a couple of backtracking parts that are very much the weakest part of the game, otherwise it's a pretty flawless game in many ways, in my view. Like, I really liked it that much. It was so impressive.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's it. Luigi's Mansion. We've already done our outro, so we can kind of just say goodbye here, I guess. And yeah, I mean, next time on the show we will... So the Game Awards are rolling around. We haven't figured out what we're doing next time, but maybe if that's happening, we'll do some predictions for Game Awards winners and things like that.
And we'll explain sort of our Game of the Year plans for the December coming up in the next episode. More or less the same as last year, but we'll talk through those.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's exciting. End of the year, fun things as per the usual. Star Wars is happening. It's all happening. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time. Until then, thank you everybody for listening. And goodbye. The musical interludes used on today's show were Paranormal Productions from Luigi's Mansion 3, copyright Nintendo 2019, and Kurikinton from Fatal Fury 2 in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, copyright SNK and Nintendo 2019.